I should share screen. Yeah?
Yes.
Are you you started recording? You just started recording.
Only just because I forget to record my speech as usual.
Okay, so host disabled participant screen sharing. Why you disabled?
One moment. One moment. Yes, now you can do this. Mm-hmm.
I'll try now. So. Everything is okay?
Yes, Arman has started screen sharing. You should choose basic option.
Yeah, I'll try.
Oh, yes, we can see your presentation.
But why it's so slow?
You should choose start from beginning.
And now I cannot see you.
I can see you.
And my presentation.
And your presentation, yes, everything is fine.
Okay,
yes.
then.
You can start, yes.
Okay, then if there is any problem, just let me know, okay?
Everything is fine. You can start, yes.
Okay, so first of all, I'd like to express my gratitude to all organizers of today's webinar for their understanding of the importance of this type of meetings, particularly for non-Anglophone authors and editors in Eastern Europe. I'm sure all these scholars are trying to upgrade standards in their local journals and trying to publish in good journals their research articles. And hopefully today's presentation will be beneficial for both purposes, for authors and for journal editors. All points presented by me will be relevant not just to medics, but also to specialists in allied disciplines and also to sociologists, psychologists, experts in other fields struggling to get their journals indexed by prestigious global bibliographic databases. So I am a member of WAMI, or World Association of Medical Editors, and past council member of European Association of Science Editors. And I know also how important are all these editorial associations. For medics, International Committee of Medical Journal Editors is the guiding organization in terms of structuring articles, editing quality journals, and research management. So International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, to all who are not familiar with this prestigious association, it's just an association for 14 journals, leading journals in the field of general medicine, and 2 organizations like WAMI, World Association of Medical Editors, and National Library of Medicine. So International Committee is the leading organization for all journal editors. Council of Science Editors, it's American association for about 900 members. This association has its own guidelines, its own periodical titled Science Editor, and it's primarily for editors publishing in English. So it's highly prestigious society, council, and I'm sure Eastern European journal editors will also take this association as a good example for organizing their own practice as in terms of journal editing and publishing. Okay, so references. Today we are going to discuss citations and how to organize reference lists. We rely on guidance from international committee, and the most important point is that authors should provide direct links to references, original references. If they discuss a scientific fact, they should link that scientific fact in their articles with published research. If there are no published articles, they can cite unpublished sources. However, unpublished sources are not advisable because these are non-peer-reviewed. As authors, we should always try our best to cite peer-reviewed sources, peer-reviewed articles. So, and references are aimed to increase interlinks between published and publishing articles, articles in progress. So they serve this main purpose of sharing knowledge. However, some unethical authors may think that by citations, by referencing their own articles, they can boost their profiles, and this is considered as auto-citations. It should be within certain limits. If it these limits are exceeded, then it's maybe considered as unethical citing practice. We usually rely on medical subject headings, structured keywords. These keywords are important for retrieving relevant articles. So for any scientific topics, we as authors should know at least 10, 20 structured keywords. On this slide, you can see bibliography as topic related to this particular presentation. And it's also important when structured keyword introduced. There are other structured keywords, vocabularies of structured keywords for non-medics. Let's say for economists, there is American Journal of Economics vocabulary. For specialists in pharmacy, pharmacology, slightly different vocabulary. Almost all specialists have their own organized list of keywords. For medics, we have medical subject headings or MESH structured keywords. So journal editors should also be well familiar with specific structured keywords related to their journal topics. Why citations are so important? In the beginning of 1990s, the role of citations and referencing was slightly different, and it was mainly to credit original research works, to link studies to previously published methods, and to help readers to locate or navigate through literature, mainly published literature. However, situation has changed over the past 2 decades, 3 decades, and now we have other priorities. So the role of citations is expanded. We use citations and reference lists to credit. Of course, it's traditionally for crediting primary sources, primary articles. Reference lists can be consulted by journal editors for selecting reviewers. Reference lists can be matched to check whether there is plagiarism. If order of references is similar in 2 articles, concerns over plagiarism can arise. So citations are also important for research cooperation, particularly for scholarly networking. And ResearchGate, we all know now that ResearchGate serves that purpose, and we can track citations to our published articles if we upload these articles on ResearchGate. There are some bibliographic databases tracking citations. We call these bibliographic databases citation databases, like Scopus or Web of Science databases. But there is also just abstract databases like PubMed, like Medline or Embase. Medline and Embase are databases that track abstracts. They are not interested in citations. Citations are important for faculty, university, academia, because based on citations to your works, ranking of your university is also increasing. So you should know that your articles are important, not just because of your productivity, but also because for ranking of your universities. There are 3 different ranking systems: QS, the Times Higher Education rankings, and Shanghai system, Chinese system. All these 3 ranking systems are based on Scopus articles and citations. So on this screen, you can see Scopus window. I decided to discuss the publications from Danila Halicki, and you can see that they have more than 1,100 articles published throughout history of Scopus, and the highest top cited articles are published by New England Journal of Medicine, European Journal of Medicinal Chemistry. So this university is famous because of faculty active in chemistry, biochemistry, cell biology, and their articles are published in high impact factor journals. But there are also other lower or medium or lower impact journals like World Journal of Gastroenterology, and citation rate of these articles are slightly lower. Anyway, we take into account the list of articles published by universities. So affiliations are also important. I have some problems with changing my slides, but hopefully everything is clear. So analyzing the same university, we know that Roman Lesik is top author with more than 100 articles published across journals and indexed by Scopus. And we also know where all these specialists publish: in Polish journal, in Georgian journal. So I asked authors from this university to change their practice of choosing target journals. The same issue relates to all other Eastern European universities. you should understand why you choose your target journal and why you should choose journals indexed by Scopus, Medline, Web of Science, and with impact factors. When we cite articles, we should pay attention to in-text citations. There are two different styles. Vancouver style, when we encircle, when we chronologically list cited references and link in-text citations with reference lists in chronological order. Many biological journals use Vancouver style of citing and referencing. Here you can see typical citation, Vancouver style citation from local journal. Why I choose this journal? Because pay attention to references. All these references are cited by local authors and all references are Anglophone. However, when this article is published in Preventive Medicine, Anglophone journal, but when Ukrainian authors publish in their local journals, they overly cite local sources, local journals. So there should be balance. When you target top journals, you should also consider your local journals as well. Why we should pay attention to their references? Because some journals listed by Medline, not indexed by Scopus. Here is example, a journal where most Eastern Europeans or local authors published. This journal covered by Scopus, but reference lists are not visible on Scopus, which means that this article has no any influence on citation records in Scopus. We analyze profile of journal based on Scopus indexing and also based on PubMed listing. PubMed listing is visible when we search through National Library of Medicine catalog. And we should pay attention how these journals are abbreviated. Usually the rule is they are abbreviated based on National Library of Medicine standards or in International Standard Version 4, ISO 4. So pay attention whether the journal is covered by Scopus or not. Here is an example of journal, Ukrainian Biochemical Journal, one of the leading journals, which was covered by Medline. Unfortunately, they lost covering indexing by Medline because of language issues, quality issues, but this happened in 2017, but now the journal is still covered by Scopus, which is good. Now, about Harvard style of citations, it's slightly different. It's important for sociologists, psychologists, specialists in arts and humanities, because in these fields, scientific fields, it's important to know who was the main author of an article. In medicine, in biomedicine, where we have multi-authored papers, the name of first and other authors is not so important, which is why we, as medics, choose Vancouver style. Vancouver style is easier, technically easier than Harvard style. However, there are some journals, a sizable number of journals relying on Harvard style of citing. The principle is citations are or references listed in alphabetical order, not in chronological order, and each in-text citation linked to year of publication, name of first author and year of citation. So there are some general, here is example, scientometrics, and I ask you to read this article from Ukraine. The article criticized publishing patterns in your country and paid attention of medics who frequently publish in journals without any credentials, without any impact indicators or high impact indicators. The author particularly mentioned about journals from Poland and Georgia. So you should also be very careful when you choose your target journal. How we cite web sources. There should be balance. We cannot overly cite web sources because some of these web sources have a short half-life. So be very careful when you cite web sources. Try to cite reliable sources and pay attention to authors of web pages. Mention title, date of your access, and date of update available on home page of that link. And of course, if there is a digital object identifier or internet link, please mention that internet link as well. Not all web references are reliable in terms of longevity. So some from top journals, let's say Lancet, British Medical Journal, are reliable because they can last on average 5 years. They can be active 5 years. But there are some other references to web sources which are not long-lasting. They are active just 2 years. So it's important to rely and cite highly reliable internet sources. Here is an example of citing a number of internet sources in an article about rheumatology in Ukraine. So it's an exemplary journal article in good journal. But the problem is that when you describe discipline or science field branch in your country, there are not many options. Not all articles appear in peer-reviewed journals. So the authors made their best to cite reliable articles. However, they also cited some local internet resources, and I'm not sure that these internet sources will last long. So try to cite long-lasting internet sources. How we cite articles? First principle is to cite scientific facts. If in one sentence you have several scientific facts, like in this example, microalbuminuria, mean platelet volume are associated with hypertension in patients with rheumatoid arthritis. There are 2 scientific facts. So each scientific fact is linked with relevant article. This pattern of citing is correct. However, you can also list these in-text citation at the end of sentence. When we have several or multiple examples of citations, we should list them in chronological order. Here is reference to an article published in 2003, 2005, and 2007. All these 3 relate to a single scientific fact. Editorial policies rely on citations from leading open access publishers like Biomed Central. The same principles are applicable to non-medics. So the most important point here is any statement in your manuscript that relies on external scientific information should be linked to a citation. Authors should link their scientific facts with primary sources, not to secondary or review articles, because review articles are not primary sources. Review articles are secondary publications relying on original articles. How we organize our references. PhD candidates usually have all these tools available for them, and I know that Clarivate Analytics promotes EndNote. However, I'm not sure that there are many researchers relying on an EndNote reference manager, because it's mainly used by American specialists or all those who have permanent access to Web of Science. However, there are some free reference managers like Zotero and Mendeley. Mendeley is free, integrated with Elsevier publisher. And you should know about Mendeley, which is also a social networking platform for bookmarking. It's now tracked by alternative metrics. And it helps to increase profile of individual articles. Here is an example of citations to COVID-19. There are currently a high number of references to COVID-19, and all social media activities, including Mendeley activities, are tracked by Altmetric and presented on this slide. When we use Altmetric for tracking social media activity, we pay attention to donut ring. This blue part relates to Twitter activities. And here you can see that this particular article is bookmarked by Mendeley users. Mendeley users are usually those from Anglophone countries. However, I'm sure that your fellows will also will have access to Mendeley without any problem and use this reference manager. Reference managers are usually reliable if they're allowed to change format. It's important, particularly when you get multiple rejections and you submit your article from one journal to another, you need technically to reformat, change format of your references, and reference managers like Mendeley help you in that sense. I should ask all local or non-Anglophone authors to be very careful when they cite articles. There should be balance between local and international references. Here is an example from Brasilia, where local non-Anglophone authors overly cite local articles for local journals, but when they submit their articles to top English journals, they rarely cite local Brazilian articles. So there should be balance. And here is another example from International Endocrinology Journal, its local journal. You can see that this journal is relatively well advanced, and we can see some local articles. The author, particularly in this article, cited endocrinology sources, and the second source, problem of endocrine pathology in Ukrainian. The article is visible on Scopus. However, if local sources are not visible on Scopus, journal editor may ask to replace poorly visible source with better visible, widely visible source with digital object identifier. So these two local sources are not linked to digital object identifiers. So pay attention whether the article is with this digital ID. There are some differences in reference styles. So in Western Europe, researchers overly cite, they have larger lists of references, and this situation is more or less the same within the past 10 years. However, when we compare leading countries, developed countries, with China, Japan, non-Anglophone countries, we see that number of references in their articles is low on average. And the situation is almost the same over the past decades. So these figures, these numbers tell us that researchers in developed countries use Scopus and other bibliographic database searches. However, those from non-Anglophone countries rarely rely on database searches. There are some differences between specialties, arts and humanities, or immunology specialists. They overly cite, they have longer lists of references in their articles compared to specialists in mathematics or nursing. So this is why impact indicators across disciplines vary different. So when we cite articles, we rely on citation guidelines from American Psychological Association. And they have some points. One of these points relates to the fact that each sentence should, in your articles, should ideally be linked to reference. If there is no reference, it means that the article, the reference or sentence relates to your own ideas. As medics, we rely on International Committee reference guidelines, and they have, we briefly touched this before. I asked you to cite only published or peer-reviewed articles. The same principles can be adapted to non-medics, but a reference to these guidelines is desirable. All other specialists, medics and non-medics, rely on Council of Science Editors citation guidelines coming from originally from white paper on promoting integrity. And we know that citation manipulations, coercive citations, pushed citations are considered as unethical. We now endorse DORA declaration, which is a declaration for all specialists, and some local journals endorsed this declaration officially. No need to rely on journal impact factors. There are a number or basket of metrics, alternative metrics as well. So you can see that some local individuals and organizations endorsed DORA, and I encourage all today's participants also familiarize with DORA statements and become signatories of this important declaration. Reference validation is important for journal editors. How we validate? There are some mechanical or technical tools available. Here you can see from editorial manager. Not all journals are equipped with this editorial manager, allowing to automatically validate sources. For all those lacking this validation source, simply you should manually check each reference in each article to avoid problems, to avoid poor visibility of your reference lists. Here is an example how we can increase citations to our articles. Journal editors can present citation mode just below their article titles with correct abbreviation, page numbers, volume numbers, and even digital object identifier. There are numerous journals using this style. So no need to encourage citations on websites of journals. It should be done ethically, not like on this slide. It can cause retractions. Auto citations, unethical citations also cause retractions and even sanctions towards journals, like Brazilian journals with numerous auto citations, journal auto citations. Here is an example from non-Anglophone journal with a number of citations to chief editors' articles. The journal was delisted from Scopus for a long while. An example of reference list of Kazakhstani specialists who still publish mainly in Russian and all these references are poorly visible. When we open reference lists, we increase visibility, and this style is applicable to all specialists. If you have subscription journal, you should at least increase visibility of reference lists of your articles. References are important for citation alerts. When your article is cited by someone, the system tracks these citations and informs you about your citation. Both Springer, Nature, and Elsevier, they have similar systems for citation alerts. And these alert systems are important for cooperation. So here is example again from Springer Nature journal, Scientometrics. They open its subscription journal, but all references are visible, openly visible, and we can at least have our preliminary judgment about this published article. Which are acceptable and unacceptable references? Please memorize this table, points from this table, and enforce these points in your editorial policies. No need to cite non-peer-reviewed, retracted, or promotional articles from, let's say, from YouTube. I told you that unpublished articles are not desirable. However, there are some preprint service allowing to cite, let's say, medRxiv, bioRxiv, socioRxiv. So there should be balance. So now I stop sharing my screen. And hand over microphone to moderator.
Yes. Now I would like to ask our next speaker, Dr. Durga. Are you ready for your presentation? Dr. Durga? Так, I have to unmute Dr. Durga. One moment. One moment. Oh, yes, everything is fine. Поки доктор Дурга включає свою презентацію, я хочу додати, що забула згадати місто Полтаву. Так? З Полтави в нас є два учасники. Це Ірина Черниш, Національний університет імені Юрія Кондратюка, і також Дмитро Бойко з Української медичної стоматологічної академії. Також ми сьогодні маємо 4 країни-учасників. Це Україна, Великобританія, Індія і також Сполучені Штати Америки, адже з нами ще є доктор Василь Лунчина із Чикаго. І також забули ще згадати один журнал, який теж представляє це на вебінарі, це «Медична наука України». Dr. Durga, is everything fine? Can you share your screen?
Yes, I'm just starting.
Yes.
Are you able to see my screen now?
Yes, yes, yes.
Good evening. Thank you to Dr. Olina and Dr. Arman for inviting me to give this small talk on common mistakes in writing and statistics by authors and editors. And I do not have any disclosures to make. I shall have this layout for the talk wherein I shall talk about common statistical mistakes, common mistakes in ethical aspects of manuscripts, as well as common mistakes in language. So first, coming to common statistical mistakes. Now, we all know that these are the various types of variables. They could be qualitative variables or they could be quantitative variables, and qualitative or categorical variables could be ordinal or could be nominal, and quantitative variables could be discrete or continuous. Now, I have a small poll for you. Which of these should we be presenting data using means? Can some of you give your opinions in the chat box? How do I view the chat box from the middle of the lecture? Is there any way to do that?
What would you like to do, Dr. Durga?
Yeah, I just wanted an opinion. Which of these four should be presented using means from the audience? These four types of variables.
Okay, which one is the most important? What do you think? Dr. Durga, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, I can hear you.
Yes.
My question was, which of these variables should be presented using means and standard deviations?
Maybe quantitative.
Yeah. So I just wanted an opinion from the audience. That's all right. We can proceed ahead. So very often we find means being presented in the manuscript to describe variety of variables. Actually, here to understand which are to be best presented using means, we need to understand two separate concepts. There are two types of data. They could be continuous versus discontinuous. And another attribute is they could be normally distributed versus not normally distributed. So it is important to understand that these are two exclusive things. You could be continuous without being normally distributed, and you can be discontinuous but normally distributed. So one is to do with the type of the data, and the other is to do with the distribution of the data. Distribution meaning if you were to plot the values on a graph, how they appear from the lowest to the highest, what is the trend that appears in the data, that is called as the distribution of the data. So assessment of normality is very important, and many authors often forget to assess normality, and they would straight away use means and standard deviations to describe the results without actually assessing normality. So this is what is called as a normal distribution. All the values will lie symmetrically around a central point, which is also the point where the most number of observations are there, and which is also the point lying at approximately the middle distribution of the data. So this is actually what is called as the mean of the data. And in a normal distribution, a mean is equal to the median, which is the midpoint of the data, and is also equal to the mode, which is the most common observation in the data. So unless data is distributed normally, one should not be using means and standard deviations to depict it, because it could be fallacious. And generally what we look at is the two standard deviation for a normally distributed sample will encompass nearly 95% of the entire distribution of the data. So 95% of the variables will lie between plus and minus 2 standard deviation. And this holds true for a normal distribution, but not if the data is not normally distributed. If the data is, say, distributed like this would be what is called as a right skew. This would be what is called as a right skew, and this would be called as a left skew. So skewed data should not be presented using measures that are meant for presentation of normal data, that is means. So this is one important message, and this is one important mistake that authors often make. Hence, as editors and reviewers, we need to ask them how they assess normality. How to assess normality? One, we saw that by visually inspecting the data. It is tapering in the extremes and more number of observations in the center of the data. Second is the mean approximates the median, approximates the mode. And there are also formal tests of normality. I don't want to go into the details. I just want to give an overview of what are the important concepts that we need to look at while looking at the data. Next, after we have looked at normality, what is a continuous variable? By definition, a continuous variable is one between any 2 points in the data set if one can have an infinite number of observations. Example, temperature. Say between 37 degree Fahrenheit and 38 degree Fahrenheit. You can have 37.1, you can have 37.123, you can have 37.1234, you can have 37.123456, and an infinite number of values can come between those two limits of 37 and 38. This is what is called as a continuous variable. Commonly, a source of confusion for continuous variables is many of our scores are based on visual analog scales. We often have these visual analog scales that are used across diseases, across specialties. Let's say a visual analog scale for pain, which rates from 0 to 10, 0 being no pain and 10 being the most severe pain. Generally, there will be 10 data points on this, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 up to 10. This appears like a continuous variable, but actually between 2 and 3, how many values can be put in? Generally none. Generally the rater would rate it as 2 or as 3 or as 4, but not between 2 and 3. So this is actually, they are not continuous variables. They are rather discrete and ordinal. That is, 2 is greater than 1 and 3 is greater than 2. But 2 is not greater than 1 by the same extent that 3 is greater than 2 in all cases. So that's why this is not a continuous scale. So whenever we are having such a visual analog scale based data, these are discrete ordinal scales, and therefore it is not right to present them by using means. You also should present them using non-parametric measures like medians with range or with interquartile range. In addition to this, you can also present the mean with standard deviation if the variable is normally distributed, provided it is normally distributed. What is the advantage of presenting the data as both means and as non-parametric means using median and range with interquartile range? If somebody takes up this data for a meta-analysis later on, somebody wants to do a quantitative synthesis of this data along with data from other studies, then they can use this mean with standard deviation that you're presenting in addition. But that should not be the primary data that you present in such a situation. So you can present these means, but along with the medians, and you must compare them with non-parametric tests. In addition to, if you're presenting the means, the parametric test can be used, of course, after assessing a normality of the distribution, before considering to present the data using means and standard deviation. Next important thing that we often come across in papers is comparison between groups. And very often we tend to look at p-values. First, we need to understand what p-values are. P-values are what we take as the level of type 1 error. What is a type 1 error? Type 1 error is, in a study, let's say you're trying to prove that drug A is better than drug B for the treatment of hypertension. That is, drug A reduces blood pressure to a greater extent than drug B for the treatment of hypertension. So this is the hypothesis that you have put forth at the beginning of your study. You always have a null hypothesis that there is no difference between drug A and drug B. The actual difference that you see between drug A and drug B in the target population, that is the entire population from which you are taking your sample of patients, is 0. That is the null hypothesis. And you try to disprove this null hypothesis using the data that you have. The p-value is nothing but an estimate of the type 1 error or alpha error, which is the probability of rejecting a null hypothesis when the null hypothesis actually is true. That is, there is actually no difference between the reduction in blood pressure by drug A and drug B, but you are accidentally finding a difference. The probability of that is taken as the p-value or type 1 error. So if a p-value of 0.045, this means that you are accepting a 4.5% chance that the difference that you're observing between the two groups is just by chance and doesn't actually exist. A p-value of 0.15 means that the difference between the two groups is likely to be due to chance in 15%, which is an unacceptably high limit. Generally, we take it as 5%, and in some certain situations, even lesser than that, and some situations at 10%. So the p-value is nothing but the probability of rejecting a null hypothesis when the null hypothesis is actually true. And it is not a very important measure of difference, because all it tells you is that there is a statistically significant difference between the two groups at the 95% confidence level. What does the 95% confidence level mean? The 95% confidence level means that if you were to repeat the study 100 times in the same population, 95 times you would get your results in the range that come in the 95% confidence limits. If the difference is beyond that, then it is likely that you get a significant p-value. But very often, right from the beginning, whenever we have started to read papers, we have focused a lot on p-values. And hence, when we do research and when we report research, we tend to look at p-values. It is not actually the p-values that are important, because p-values could mean a statistically significant difference, but the difference may actually be very small in real life. It may be a very small but significant difference, which may not be relevant in real life. So what is more important is a measure of effect size. Effect size is the difference in effect between two groups. For continuous variables, it's a difference in the absolute values. If they're normally distributed, a difference in the absolute values of their means. For categorical variables, differences in odds ratios, risk ratios, or rate ratios. And what we need to look at is the effect size and the 95% confidence intervals. And does this effect size cross a barrier of what is called as a minimally clinically important difference? Let's say, going back to the same example of two drugs used for treatment of hypertension. Let's say drug A reduces blood pressure by 4 millimeters of mercury, and drug B reduces blood pressure by 2 millimeters of mercury. And we have taken 20,000 patients treated with drug A and another 20,000 patients treated with drug B. We find that the p-value for the difference between 4 millimeter and 2 millimeter of mercury is 0.001, which means that there is 0.1% chance that it has arisen simply by chance. So most likely there is a real difference of the effect in the antihypertensive effect between these two drugs. So we are very happy that a p-value of 0.001, which is a very small p-value, which we think shows us a very significant difference. Yes, it is a very significant statistical difference. But if you look at the face value of the difference is 4 millimeter mercury and 2 millimeter mercury. It is insignificant in terms of a minimally clinically important difference, which may be say 5 or 10 millimeters of mercury. So effect size tells us whether the difference is actually what is the magnitude of the difference and the 95% confidence intervals of the difference, particularly if we are comparing two groups. If the 95% confidence intervals are significantly overlapping, then there may not be very much difference between the effect. If they're distinct from each other, then it's likely that there will be a difference. So in this relation, what happens sometimes is we tend to look for significant p-values. Tend to look for significant p-values without any direction. And sometimes when we have 20 different variables available, we will do multiple correlation analysis. And inevitably, one or two of those correlations would be significant. Then you try to explain how the correlation between body mass index and residence in a particular location is related. So these are actually what happens is when you do multiple comparisons, your chance of getting erroneous positive correlations increases. The chance of getting false positive associations increases. Hence, if multiple correlation analysis are done without any direction, it is actually of little value. And it is important that research that we do and report should be hypothesis driven. And such research is valued by reviewers and editors. It is not whether the research reports a very good or positive finding that is important. It is whether the research has used rigorous methodology in order to obtain the results and reported them as they were. That is what is valued more by reviewers and editors. So in my experience, a negative study with rigorous methodology, a so-called negative study, there is nothing called as a negative study. Negative study meaning one that did not attain the difference in the hypothesis that they had initially proposed. But if it was done with rigorous methodology, is much more valuable than a positive study whose methodology is dubious. So in this context, as editors and reviewers, we must demand that the methodology is described in as much detail as possible so that a third person can replicate the study design just by reading your paper. And one important aspect of methodology is a sample size. Why? A sample size should be adequate to ensure adequate power to your study, to be able to identify a difference if it truly exists. Power of the study is the ability to identify a true difference in the population should such a difference truly exist. Another common aspect that we see is when there are two groups that are being compared. Very often authors will compare them with univariable analysis. They will just see the differences either between the means and standard deviations. They will just compare the two and look at the effect sizes, and if it is categorical variables, they will look at the odds ratios and then just report the results based on that. It is important to understand that univariable analysis are unadjusted analysis. There could be a lot of confounding variables or other variables which influence these results and thereby make differences appear between groups when they actually do not exist. For example, you could find that mortality with drug A is more than mortality with drug B. But when you actually adjust them for age, you will find that patients who were taking drug A were older. And as a result, their mortality was higher because they were at a higher risk of mortality. So unless you do the adjusted analysis for age, you will not know that there was actually no difference in mortality between the two groups. Hence, it is important to follow up univariable analysis with appropriate multivariable adjusted regression analysis to identify predictors which have been adjusted for a particular variable. After looking at common statistical mistakes, I shall briefly touch upon common mistakes in ethical aspects of manuscripts. There are two important ethical principles for the conduct of research, and these are two distinct things. One is overview of a research ethics committee, and the second is informed consent from participants. Very often authors would confuse these two. They would mention that ethics committee has approved this, but they would not mention about informed consent. And sometimes they would write that written informed consent has been obtained from all the participants, but they don't mention anything about ethics committee overview. So it is important that editors and reviewers should emphasize on these two aspects and demand to know from the authors whether, as per local guidelines, a research ethics committee overview was appropriate. In certain instances, it may not be appropriate. Let us say educational survey. In certain countries like mine, there is no need for a research ethics committee overview. But in other countries, they might require that. So as per local guidelines, if a research ethics committee overview is required, it must be mentioned, or else it must be mentioned that it was not required as per local guidelines. And second, informed consent from participants, particularly important for prospective studies. In retrospective studies, sometimes authors do not mention about informed consent. Very many times when patients come to a hospital, they sign a general consent form that their data may be used later on. That is not informed consent. Informed consent is you tell the patient about what you are doing, why you are doing it, and then after that you invite them to participate, and they may accept or refuse to participate. In such cases, when there is retrospective data, what you can do is, if you cannot contact the patients, let's say it's data over 20 years, some patients may have shifted away, some patients may not be alive at the time that you're writing the study. In that case, you can go to the ethics committee and ask them to waive the requirement for written informed consent. But you must mention this very clearly, again, in accordance with your local guidelines. So I would suggest that editors and reviewers be aware of these two distinct aspects of research ethics committee overview and informed consent, and separately clarify them from the authors of any paper. Even for case reports, it is considered suitable to seek consent to publish. That is, the patient in question should give their consent so that their information can be published. Otherwise, later on, it can create problems with confidentiality, and even has resulted in retraction of some case reports when patients could identify that they had been published without their permission and they contacted the journal in question. Next is authorship is another important ethical aspect that editors particularly must look at, and the current ICMG recommendations, as Dr. Arman had told, this is the body that gives the latest guidelines for the ethical and appropriate reporting of scientific manuscripts. And it recommends in the biomedical setting that authorship should be based on the following 4 criteria. First, related to the work, the conduct of the work. Either somebody should have contributed to the conception or design of the work, or to the data that was acquired for the work, or analyze the data that was required to write the particular manuscript. Second thing is that either they must have drafted the manuscript themselves, or somebody else in the author team has drafted it and they have revised it critically. Third thing is that their final approval has been obtained for publication of the manuscript. And the fourth is that they're agreeing to be accountable for all aspects of the manuscript, and to ensure that if any questions arise about how appropriate or inappropriate the manuscript was with respect to any aspect, they shall ensure that this shall be appropriately investigated and followed up upon. So unless one is ready to fulfill these 4 criteria, in today's world, one should not accept to be an author of a paper, because later on you can be held responsible if you, let's say you have not given final approval for the version to be published and somebody else has published, then that is inappropriate. If you cannot agree to point number 4, if you cannot vouch for the veracity of the data, then you should not agree to be an author for that. And this is because there are various types of authorship inappropriateness that can be there, like guest authorship. A famous person is made an author so that that paper has a greater profile. A gift authorship, somebody is my friend and I just want to add their name to that paper. And ghost authorship, somebody else has written the paper, let's say a manuscript about a drug. The pharmaceutical company which markets the drug has written that manuscript, but doesn't want to be named as an author because they feel that people may take it as a conflict of interest. These are all types of inappropriate authorship and should be avoided to avoid further problems with respect to authorship in the future. Briefly touching upon conflicts of interest, these are when there exists a possibility of secondary gain from the publication of the manuscript. These conflicts of interest could exist for authors. These could either be financial gain from the publication of an innovation, or could be social gain like prestige from the publication of a manuscript, which obviously is there for most manuscripts. But one should not inflate the implications of your manuscript beyond reasonably acceptable limits to avoid this kind of a conflict of interest. For peer reviewers, there may be a conflict of interest of academic gain when it's a competitor of yours that is publishing the paper. You don't want the paper to be published, so you try to give comments which hinder the publication of that paper. You should avoid doing that. Or one may unethically seek to promote one's own work by telling them to cite your papers. That is also not an appropriate strategy of doing it, and one should avoid doing that as a peer reviewer. Similarly, for editors also, when they deal with competitors or collaborators' manuscripts, this is probably not a good idea if you are the final authority in taking the decision on that manuscript. Somebody who is not directly in contact with the author team should be the final authority in deciding whether to accept or reject their manuscript. If you are in contact with the author team, you should probably not take that decision. And second is misappropriation of intellectual property rights. For example, I am editing a manuscript on an area that looks very interesting. I prevent that manuscript from getting published or delay the peer review process, and then simultaneously work on that idea and get that idea published before that manuscript gets published. That is not ethically acceptable. That leads on to conflict of interest. So these are all conflicts of interest that editors, reviewers, and authors should be aware of, and it is the responsibility predominantly of editors to take care that such conflicts of interest do not come into the scene. Finally, coming to the ethical aspect of plagiarism and redundant publications. Plagiarism is when one takes portions of a manuscript verbatim and publishes it without referencing the original source. Also, it could refer to plagiarism of ideas. That is, you steal somebody else's idea and you try to work on that without acknowledging that they were the source of the idea. And let's say before they have published their manuscript on that idea, you go ahead and publish that. It could also be related to other aspects of publication, like duplicate publication. You publish the same manuscript twice. Redundant publication, your manuscript tells essentially what is already been told in another manuscript, but you either expand it a little or you present it in a slightly different way. Or salami slicing, which is you could present a manuscript comprehensively containing an entire picture about, say, a disease condition, but you choose to publish it as 5 different papers when they could easily coherently be published under one single paper. That is called as salami slicing. Editors should take care that such instances of plagiarism, duplicate publication, redundant publication, and salami slicing are not done. And in the context of plagiarism of words, it is important to understand, because we have many softwares like Authenticate available today, which tell us that this much similarity is there with this paper and all that. And many a time people tend to think that Authenticate picks up plagiarism. Authenticate does not pick up plagiarism. Plagiarism is detected by editors and reviewers, not by Authenticate or any other software. So it is the editor and reviewer's responsibility to go and check with the previous literature, with any areas that are deemed similar by the similarity checking software. And if indeed it is plagiarism or not. If it is just, say, a paragraph or a portion of a line, 3 or 4 words that is similar, that is not plagiarism. But if it is whole sections of the manuscript written in the same order, sharing the same order of references, sharing the same references, that would be considered as plagiarism. Even if it is just 1/20th of a paper, I would consider that as plagiarism. But even that may show up as similarity of less than 5% on the similarity checking software. That can be plagiarism, whereas similarity of 25% could be due to small 3 or 4 letter phrases at multiple places which are in common because they are just commonly used phrases. And that would not account as plagiarism. So it is for the editors and reviewers to decide upon and identify whether there is plagiarism or not just rely blindly on the software. And particularly plagiarism of images cannot be picked up by softwares as of today. Editors will have to carefully look at the cross references to pick up these images, which were previously published and are being duplicated by the authors without due permission. So young authors can avoid falling foul of plagiarism by habitually referencing and using free similarity checking softwares and taking permission before reproducing any figures or tables. And sometimes they may not realize that they have taken verbatim some sentences from a particular manuscript and written it in their paper. They should take care to go back to the references and read them to ensure that there is no similarity of the text, particularly if they have written something similar in the past. There is a a subconscious tendency to use the same language again, unless that paper is referred to. Even if you have written to it, you yourself have written that paper in the past, unless you reference it, that can still be considered as plagiarism. Finally, coming to common mistakes in language in manuscripts. Very often, particularly with inexperienced authors, there is a lack of flow in the manuscript. This is very difficult to define, but all I can say is that flow in a manuscript comes with time and with experience. There is no magic bullet. And if one feels, or somebody, one of your critics feels that the manuscript is lacking a flow, it is best to take help of experienced colleagues. Most of us will have experienced colleagues whom we can consult and take their help to improve the flow of a manuscript. Sometimes people may use support of external editing agencies. Here, as an editor, it is very important that we emphasize that authors have declared transparently the use of external editing agencies in any cover letter that they provide to the journal. They should declare that they have used so-and-so editing agency who has done this and this job, and what exactly is the job that they have done, whether they have written the whole manuscript, whether they have edited the manuscript. All this should be transparently declared. If it is not declared, if it is detected at a later stage, then editors tend to look at such manuscripts with lesser importance. They tend to give such manuscripts lesser importance. So it is best to acknowledge any external support, including that of peers. Maybe a colleague in my department helped in editing the language. I take their permission and I acknowledge them in the acknowledgement section of the manuscript. It is best to be transparent as much as possible. Second thing is grammatical errors. Again, for non-Anglophone authors, getting hold of appropriate grammar is sometimes difficult, particularly if you have started writing scientific articles at an older age, after you have finished medical school, or at that time you are starting to write articles in English. Before that, you may be experienced in writing. So how to deal with it? There are fortunately many freely available softwares like Grammarly, which help to improve the grammar of one's writing. And I would suggest that young authors use such softwares to improve their language, and gradually, say over 5 to 10 years, everybody will attain their own skill and they will not need to use such softwares repeatedly. And Dr. Arman has extensively talked about referencing. I really don't have any excess points to add regarding that. But one thing is, please reference in the correct format of the journal, because it makes the paper appear professional. Avoid excessive self-citations unless needed, unless warranted. Avoid references more than 20 years old. Otherwise, your paper seems outdated. But there may be certain instances you might want to reference some classic papers. Like Takayasu arthritis is an area that I work in, and there is this criteria or NIH criteria which were published in 1994. And as you can see, just today I took this screenshot from Google. This has been cited more than 1800 times. It's warranted to cite this kind of a paper even today, even 15 years down the line, because this is a classic paper. But otherwise, unless if it's a classic paper, unless it's a paper that is essential for the understanding of your study, try to reference something that is more recent rather than old references. With this, I would like to conclude by telling that appropriate statistical presentation is very important. Adjusted multivariable analysis in addition to univariable analysis must be done. Appropriate attention to ethical aspects, both informed consent and research ethics committee overview. Appropriate referencing. Avoid plagiarism, and as editors carefully look for it. Use the best language that you can write. Take help of colleagues or free online software. And transparency at every aspect with regards to the help that you have taken for the manuscript, with regards to the references. Transparency is the key to good and appropriate scientific writing. Thank you.
Dear Durga, thank you very much for your excellent presentation. Very useful, very helpful for all participants, I believe. How now we know how to improve our statistics skills. It's really useful presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go to other presentation. Dr. Armen.
Yeah, while Durga is with us, probably we should discuss these two presentations.
Okay.
So Dr. Durga, who is one of research integrity editors in his own journal, and he is, Durga is famous for criticizing authors, reviewers for not doing their job properly. So he knows everything about statistics. I remember from our communications and also from his papers published on statistics. He is also good at research ethics. He knows how to register studies, and for local participants, it's also important. Everything should be approved by local or institutional review boards. Am I right?
Yes. I think best to look at the local regulations and follow them.
Even for surveys, it's better to get approval of local committee, ethics committee, and then get waiver for informed consent. So some sociologists, arts and humanities specialists need that point as well, because everything should be approved. All research papers except reviews, opinion pieces, and letters should be approved by institutional review board. And we now live in the era of COVID-19. I think that there are not just points related to original research papers. Everything in review articles, in opinion pieces should be also very carefully reviewed by someone who is familiar with research integrity and ethics. Because if we publish something, review article, and we omit essential evidence, we can misinform our readers. In pandemic, it's quite dangerous. This is why review authors in the era of COVID-19, they should simply add a disclaimer to their articles that all points, all views expressed in that particular article are those of authors and not those of any institution or organization. And we should also discuss social media ethics. Again, in the current, in our challenging times, it's important to have specialists who are familiar with ethics, are ethical specialists, and use social media ethically, particularly Twitter. Twitter is now the main channel for sharing information and disseminating articles. And this should be also done in an ethical way. So anything related to COVID-19 should be dealt with very carefully. And you mentioned, Durga, about statistical mistakes. What I've learned from your talk is that in most studies, parameters are not normally distributed, and we should use non-parametric statistical tests, particularly from SPSS statistical package. We should also know about continuous and categorical data, or yes-no data, categorical yes-no data. Again, in biomedicine, we will deal with continuous and categorical data. And there was also one important point about 95% confidence intervals. Not many local researchers report these data, these figures, particularly when they have small sample sizes. So sample size calculation is also important, but not all researchers have good statisticians helping them, and sometimes they simply publish pilot studies. For pilot studies, no need to calculate sample size. So they should know what does it mean pilot study and normal full study, which requires sample size calculation. And you were absolutely right when you mentioned about hypothesis. Working hypothesis of an article is first step of doing research and publishing paper. Of course, there is different type of hypothesis, which is scientific hypothesis, only to express someone's ideas, hypothesis. This type of research paper is different. So any original research paper should have its working hypothesis. And editors should check whether there is properly formulated working hypothesis in the introduction of their paper. And finally, about language mistakes. We have today several linguists, and they work for different journals. I think we also have good fellow from university, Lviv University, Katerina Yakhantova, who helps authors, local authors, non-Anglophone authors, to publish articles. Her article will be published in JKMS soon. So what they should know, language mistakes are common, and often we deal with translated English in non-Anglophone articles. Non-Anglophone authors should write shortly, should have concise sentences, should use simple tense instead of playing with tenses, and should always have certain order of words. In Slavic languages, it's not so strict compared to English. In English, it's quite strict. Order of words in a sentence. And of course, sentences, we should know how to write sentences, how to connect different sentences in one paragraph and several paragraphs in the main text. So I learned from my tutors that when I write paragraph, first and last sentences of paragraphs should tell reader about aim of that paragraph and result. First and last sentences. Always as reviewer, as I also pay attention to first and last sentences. And I think that your talk is very valuable for local specialists, journal editors, particularly in any field, medics, biomedics. They should enforce some of these points in their instructions for authors. And you also had something to comment about references, citations?
Yes, one small comment. You had mentioned about reference management software. So generally what happens with automation is all of us get very complacent. We use a reference manager and we think that it will do all the job. I have been using EndNote for a number of years. And despite using a reference manager, one thing I have found very useful is at the end of the day, just as one has completed the manuscript and is going to submit, to manually check the references, because still, despite reference manager, I tend to find one or two mistakes in the reference list unless I have manually checked, like some duplicate references or some reference that was meant to reference something else. So I would suggest all authors and editors to incorporate this into their own writing, that do not just rely on reference managers. They're excellent tools, but at the end of the day, just use your human skill to recheck the thing that indeed the reference manager has done the right thing or not. Because very often, if you have 100 references, it is quite likely one or two might have been wrongly ordered or might have been wrongly placed. So it's just best to do that manually just before submitting the paper.
Thank you, Durga. Excellent point. So we should encourage local authors to use reference managers, particularly when they deal with thousands of references. And when they write review articles, before writing, they should organize their own libraries, individual libraries. In that case, they need to process hundreds of sources, and reference managers like Mendeley, which is free, is also good. EndNote is subscription-based and not available to everyone. So for review writing, it helps to have reference manager. But sometimes I also know that we should go manually. We should recheck reference lists in review articles with 100, 150 references, and pay attention to duplication. It happens. And also to correct abbreviation. Of course, there are validation system or formatting system helping to change format. However, our manual skills are important. And there was also another question about local reference lists in local journals. So to have proper quality reference lists, it's always desirable to search primary sources, search literature through databases. PubMed for medics, I mean research platform, Scopus for all specialists, and take these references, cite in a format presented in National Library of Medicine or Scopus. When we doubt whether to cite local source, like not Indian, because all Indian sources are English, but non-English sources, we should think about visibility of these sources. If sources come with digital object identifier, yes, it's possible to cite, provide DOI, and for readers, it's a service to readers who can navigate to that primary source. But sometimes DOIs in local journals are unavailable, or articles are published in local languages. So in that case, journal editors should transliterate from Slavic languages to English. And I think that if authors change their writing habits, search through Scopus, PubMed, Web of Science more, they will cite primarily evidence-based articles, and most of these articles are in English. So these are important points related to these previous presentations. Thank you, Durga, for your elegant presentation.
Thank you for teaching me.
You can stay until the end and leave this meeting at any point. Any other questions that I or Dr. Durga should answer?
It looks like we have one question from Professor Oksana Zayachkivska to Durga. Durga, we used practice of involvement of licensed translators for our manuscripts. Should we add acknowledgement to them?
I think it is best to acknowledge, in the keeping in mind the requirement for transparency, it is best that we acknowledge them in the acknowledgement section. I think Dr. Arman maybe can add a little bit to that.
So if that translation service is for the whole journal, somewhere in instructions they can mention about that. But authors themselves often also rely to commercial editing services, and I always ask as editor to disclose that information in acknowledgement. Let's say Turkish specialists, Turkish authors, Durga, it's also, we often deal with Turkish specialists who have polished English in their articles, but without any acknowledgement of commercial editing services. They often rely at services of American journal experts. Korean specialists also rely on commercial editing services, and they do not disclose. Our task is to ask all authors. It's editor's task to ask authors to disclose that information. And I am not sure about quality of editing services in Eastern Europe. I guess probably in Poland, there are many editing agencies. That service is still not so well developed in Ukraine, but we need help of linguists, good linguists. Basic principles of writing articles are the same for medics, non-medics. We should write short sentences. We should properly have proper order in sentences, write short paragraphs, should divide our text into several parts, subsections to help us. If we write full text without proper paragraphs, short paragraphs, it's confusing for readers and difficult to write. It's old Soviet style of writing, huge paragraphs or huge textual information without graphics. So another trick for non-Anglophone writers to write short full text with some original graphics. Visual information is always welcome by readers and editors, and today we have some young promising participants from Ivano-Frankovsk, let's say, or Vinica. They are going to publish review articles, and I would like to ask them to present graphics as well and shorten text in their articles to avoid language mistakes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Durga. And
you.
we can go ahead, yes, to our next presentation, Dr. Arman.
Yeah. Again, we have problem with sharing screen, but
no problem.
Okay, this time is easier, yeah.
You can share your screen with us.
I've already shared. You can see
your screen.
Yes.
We can see your presentation. Yes.
Okay, now it's easier.
Okay.
Why I decided to talk about upgrading instructions for authors. Our main task today is to encourage journal editors from Eastern Europe. I mean Ukraine, former communist countries like Poland, like Trans-Baltian countries. They have and all other EU countries in Eastern Europe have the same problems. Problems with indexing their journals with Scopus, with Web of Science, and as expert reviewer of Scopus application, I pay attention to journal instructions, how well all points are formulated. There is also a second important page that is valuable for your journal application. It relates to publication ethics and publication malpractice statement. So two important documents should be formulated by journal editors before submission their application for journal indexing. In Eastern Europe, we have hundreds of journals. Only a handful of journals are of high quality and at the moment suitable for Scopus indexing. One of the main problems relates to language. Most journals in Eastern Europe still are published in Russian. So I would stress the importance of publishing in English. And if you publish more articles in English, if you have experts, authors, influential authors submitting articles in pure English, not translated English, then your chances of indexing by Scopus and Web of Science will increase. There are some important points related to instructions for authors, not just for startup journals, but also for established journals. Let's say Nature, Science, Lancet, these are top scientific journals. They regularly update their instructions for authors. And this is why it's important to regularly check instructions for authors of journals like Lancet, for biomedical journals. Any specialist any journal editor in any specialty should check top journals to take good examples and upgrade their instructions for authors. Most think that high impact journals have excellent instructions for authors. That is not the case. There was a study from Croatian journal editors who compared qualitatively they compared quality of instructions for authors of high impact, medium impact, and low impact journals, and there was no any association. So you can have small journals without any impact factor with perfect instructions for authors. So, but always check instructions for authors in of your top journals. Let's say in medicine, Lancet, in chemistry, Nature Review Chemistry, etc. Instructions for authors have some common mistakes. All local journals should have scope, aims, and scope, and they should formulate specific scope of their journal, how their journal is different from all other journals in their subject category. Peer review statistics should be present, should be disclosed in instructions for authors. How many reviewers are involved on average? How many statistical reviewers are checking submissions? And how long it takes from submission to first decision, first round of review. Usually it's from 2 to 3 weeks, but currently, because of the pandemic, the duration of peer review and processing is shortened dramatically, has been shortened dramatically. So authorship policy. Now you know about 4 authorship criteria. These are strict criteria for biomedical journals, but there are also non-biomedical journals, ecology, psychology, sociology, arts and humanities, also can use almost the same 4 authorship criteria, and instructions for authors should tell readers what constitutes authorship, substantial contribution. Formatting, not so important nowadays, because technically everything can be formatted, can be checked, but in instructions for authors, you should inform about plagiarism, duplication, retraction briefly. There is separate section related to publication ethics and publication malpractice statement, and all these details can be presented, all this information can be presented in more detail. It's important to disclose information how editors or publishers charge, whether there are publication charges or not. There is some trick in Eastern Europe. Some journals struggling with Scopus indexing, they initially do not have publication fees, but once they get access to Scopus, indexed by Scopus, they introduce publication fees and enormous publication fees. Let's say 1,000 or more than 1,000, depends on specialty. And there are also some journals charging not just authors, but also agents. So there are some commercial agents working with these journals. So we should be very careful as editors, and we should cease that practice. So there should be no any mediatory services between authors and journals. And of course, instructions for authors should be based on editorial recommendations. So we discussed some of these associations today: International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, Council of Science Editors, and World Association of Medical Editors. Here is a list of essentials. I published this information. It's one of my favorite topics for lecturing to journal editors. And all these points should be carefully dealt with when instructions for authors are updated. We take example of Lancet. You see, Lancet is a journal huge journal, but it has also, it's a large journal, but it also has sub-journals, journals with related to certain specialty. Let's say Lancet Global Health, Lancet HIV. So they have general instructions and instructions related to specific journals. So you should also have your specialized instructions related to your regional health issues, all journals. Then in your instructions for authors, you can disclose information about priorities for all biomedical journals, high evidence-based articles, cohort studies, randomized control studies, systematic reviews are high priority items. Letters, small studies with inconclusive results are not so prioritized by good journals, let's say Croatian Medical Journal. But if you have clinical journal dealing with case reports, which is lowest level of evidence, you can consider this type of articles as top priority for your journal. It depends on scope and interest of your journals. Peer review transparency. Some of local journals I checked before this seminar in Eastern Europe, in your country, disclose information about submission, but not about acceptance. Why these dates are important? Because we should find out how long it takes to process article submission manuscript and accept it. So always disclose these dates: submission, revision, acceptance. And for online journals, it's also important to disclose online publication date. Not all journals are up to high standards. Even top rheumatology journals, when we checked these journals back in 2014, we revealed some top journals with non-disclosure of peer review statistics. So now almost all these top journals disclose that information, and I encourage your local editors also do the same. About authorship practice, authorship criteria, instructions for authors of all journals, biomedical, medical, sociological, engineering journals, always should have points about authorship. And the most important point, which is a relatively new point, accountability for all aspects presented in an article, which is fourth criterion, and it was introduced in 2013. Again, we checked and published this information about rheumatology journals and revealed by surveying authorship criteria in top journals. Not all journals updated that information in 2013. Of course, these are now updated, but it's a lesson for local journals. Always check authorship criteria and try to add new points to avoid problems with authorship. In some journals, they have strict rules, and after submission, they do not allow, journal editors do not allow to change author names, to add or delete author names. They can simply withdraw that article submission. So authorship points, criteria, and problems should be also presented in authors' guidelines. About conflicts of interest, Dr. Durga presented points about conflicts of interest. In biomedical journals, these are important, but conflicts of interest are important also for non-biomedical journals. It relates to funding of these journals. It relates to relationship with their sponsoring societies. So they should disclose that information, relationship between journal and society. Of course, the most important point here is editorial independence. If you have a journal published, let's say by Shevchenko Scientific Society, they should have their own policy, society policy, but journal policy can be different, should serve interest of their readers, evidence-based medicine, some other regional health points, health issues, and editor should be independent, not pushed by president of any society to change editorial policy. So editorial independence is important. There was research that not all editors disclose information about conflicts of interest. In biomedical journals, let's say in top rheumatology journals, they disclose information relationship with pharmaceutical industry, but not all have these disclosures. So I also encourage all biomedical journals. I know that in Eastern Europe, pharmaceutical industry is active. They sponsor research, publications, but not always disclose that information. So, and be very careful, because when you submit something, let's say on biologics, on drug treatments sponsored by local or international pharmaceutical agencies, you can have rejections and retractions if you do not disclose information about pharmaceutical agencies, their involvement in your research and funding. When we speak about conflicts of interest, we should always rely on guidance from editorial associations. And if you are not medics, other specialists, they should adapt statements from leading editorial associations presented on this slide to their realities. So there are associations like Committee on Publication Ethics. It's multidisciplinary association for journal editors, and they have recommendations or guidance. Now these are called core practices for all specialists. Research reporting guidelines. Biomedics are fortunate because they have the equator network standards. Let's say if you publish, your journal publishes case reports, you should ask your authors to adhere to research report, to CARE, case reports guidelines, case report reporting guideline standard, which was introduced in 2013. In terms of retractions, we do not have exact figures for all specialties, but for biomedicine, we rely on PubMed or Medline retractions from Medline index journals, and we know that 40%, almost roughly 40% of retractions are due to primitive or simplistic plagiarism, and plagiarism, textual plagiarism, come from non-Anglophone journals. We should also know that leading journals, leading countries like United States, and journals published in developed countries like Nature, Science, Lancet, they have highest level of retractions. Why? Because they simply care about quality of their journals and retract useless or erroneous articles. Whereas none of local Eastern European or your local journals, none retracted any article. That's impossible. That tells Scopus experts that your editors do not pay attention to retraction policies. So you can see that Nature and Science, top scientific journals, have highest rate, and I analyzed these retractions in published research. They have highest numbers of retractions. When we check instructions for authors, we pay attention to open access licenses. So the best is presented here. The most liberal, allowing authors to publish first version of article in one journal, but reposit it elsewhere in individual repositories, institutional repositories, ResearchGate, without any restriction. So CC attribution license, first one, is the best and most liberal. So check with journals whether they allow to publish your articles with this license. I'll discuss open access models a bit later. Now I just encourage all journal editors to disclose information about publication charges. If you publish, if your journal is indexed and you charge your authors, disclose why you charge your authors. It's for language editing, for XML conversion, for archiving, or for any other purposes. Everything should be presented. Reference formatting. It's technical process, and technical editors or managing editors, it's their main task. They can do it using reference managers, but as rightly Dr. Durga noted, we should also check manually. Reviewers should check selectively some references, whether these references are relevant, whether there is abundant auto citations or not. So this type of points are of great interest to journal editors. DOIs. In your reference lists, most articles should be with these digital IDs for visibility and for navigating from your journal to another journal. And in your reference lists, you can easily have these DOI identifiers for all references. It's easily done from Crossref. If you are members of Crossref, it can be done easily. So Crossref also is integrated with Open Research and Contributor ID, so-called ORCID ID. It's important for visibility, ORCID ID of individual authors. So it's another digital ID, and in your instructions for authors, this type of information that you mandate your authors or strongly encourage to have ORCID IDs along with your articles is important. Let's say, I know that Zaslavsky House journals, they have some journals strictly adhering to disclosure of ORCID IDs of all authors. Here is an example from Korean well-digitized journal, how they list ORCID IDs of all co-authors before references. You can do it slightly different if you have this option of integrating authors' names, linking into authors' names with ORCID ID, with green icon. So for all journals, structured abstracts are important. Structured means divided into several sections: objective, objective, aims, methods, results, and conclusions. So structure. In biomedicine, we use IMRAD structure: introduction, methods, results, and discussion, conclusion. So IMRAD. Structured abstracts are important for evaluating journals, and if you have short abstracts, mostly short abstracts in your journal, chances of indexing by Scopus and other databases are minimal. Your instructions for authors can also tell some specific groups of authors about details, how you adhere to, let's say, Committee on Publication Ethics guidelines, and you can separately list or upload links to these editorial guidelines, which are important for authors, reviewers, and editors. Now about relatively new point. So all journals applying to Scopus should have publication ethics and publication malpractice statement, exactly with this title, and tell experts about author responsibilities, reviewer responsibilities, editorial work share, publisher responsibilities, or if there is an association involved in publishing, what is a relationship between publisher and chief editor, editorial board members. Now, about author responsibilities. First responsibility is to submit non-plagiarized, valuable research article or review article without any copying. Authors of trials are requested to share primary data. All candidates of dissertations or PhD candidates, they have certain articles. Sometimes they are asked to present primary data, so they should archive their primary data somewhere and upon request should present this data. Reviewer responsibilities. First and most important is confidentiality. We always have problems with this point in Eastern Europe, probably because of Soviet style of work, because of unethical stance of research managers. So everything throughout peer review process should be confidential, and even after publication, nothing should be disclosed about public peer review process. Even if it is public or open peer review, they should put everything in editorial management system, and nothing should be used to promote reviewers' own interests. Reviewers should be experts. If they are invited by chief editor, it means that it's an honor and responsibility. They should also respond to invitations timely, without any delay, usually within 1-2 days, and should respond to with comments within 7 days up to 2 weeks. In the current epidemic, it's important to submit within 2-3 days without any delays. And I always rely on guidance from WAMI, World Association of Medical Editors. Other specialists can rely on guidance from Council of Science Editors, also important, and they should find useful points for their instructions for authors. Editor responsibilities. Dr. Durga mentioned about chief editor's responsibility. Unfortunately, we have too many problems in Eastern Europe because chief editors abundantly publish in their journals their own articles, of course, without any peer review. And with this type of journals, they apply to Scopus. Of course, experts like me spot this type of editorial mistakes and reject Scopus applications. So be very careful when you deal with submissions from chief editor or editorial staff. Always involve in evaluation someone who is not part of editorial board. And here are some examples of best editors-in-chief. Lancet chief editor and another Iranian editor. These two editors have the best editorial stance and editorial credentials. The second, Farokh Habibzadeh, is an expert in statistics. For being a good editor, statistical skills are important in any field, because scholarly journals are based on mathematization or statistics. So understanding statistics is important. And when you submit your journal application, you should always present good profile of chief editor, responsible editors, two responsible editors. And it's also important to have social media editor for journal. Social media editor should understand ethics and should promote selected articles without disclosing information about patients, without promoting articles sponsored by pharmaceutical industry. And we have excellent reviewers, excellent editors, familiar, good at social media promotion. Good examples in biomedicine come from BMJ group journals. And you see that in one top biomedical journal, like Annals of Rheumatic Diseases, they have several social media editors. Each of these editors is responsible for a certain part of work. So local journals started introducing that role in their editorial stuff, but we still have problems because not many Eastern European authors and other contributors use Twitter, Facebook, and other social media channels for scholarly purposes. Examples of journals that use social media and points about social media should be also disclosed in instructions for authors. You can see that two journals, both from Zaslavsky Publishing House, have good social media editor and individual pages for their journals. Medical Sciences as well, they also have excellent page, but they have not just Twitter, they also have Facebook page. So, and use these both channels for promotion of their published articles. Promotion is also part of editorial work, and it's also a responsibility for editorial staff members. Speaking about roles and responsibilities, we rely on Council of Science Editors white paper. Latest revision was published in 2018, and these guidelines can be used for drafting or upgrading instructions for authors. Committee on Publication Ethics also upgraded and updated their points, and now they have core practices, slightly different from previously published flowcharts or guidelines of Committee on Publication Ethics. Again, all local journals, Eastern European journals, should revise their instructions for authors and publication ethics statements based on these updated pages. And publication ethics relies on conflicts of interest disclosures. So there is freely available form, conflicts of interest form. You can use this form, or you can also have your own adapted form. Let's say for biologists, non-biomedics, principles are the same. You should have a form for disclosing conflicts of interest statements and presenting these statements properly before references. We have recommendations coming from FAMI, and ethics statements are important. We often rely on their statements. Now, how we improve our skills, editorial skills. To become an editor of a journal, it's not just enough to have an administrative post or be an academician or member of society. The most important points relate to editorial credentials coming from this type of seminars, webinars, and from following science editing journals. There are several high quality, widely visible journals: Science Editing, indexed by Scopus; Medical Writing, again indexed by Scopus; and Publications. All these three relate to medicine, biomedicine, and non-biomedical disciplines. So I personally learned a lot about writing English sentences, paragraphs, and text from by reading medical writing journal, or formerly Right Stuff. Relatively new journals are Science Editing and Publications. They publish articles in good polished English and cover issues related to all writing, editing, and reviewing issues. So I also encourage all today's participants to follow publications, articles in these leading journals for science editors. Any comments, points, questions up to this moment? Over to moderator.
Recently, we don't have any questions from our participants. It means that we can start your other presentation, yes.
So are we short of time?
We should finish at 8 o'clock.
In 50 minutes, yeah?
45 minutes, yes.
I see, okay. So next part relates to open access. Open access saves lives. If we publish nowadays articles for open access, we may save lives. You can see this article published in Lancet with huge social media attention, particularly due to Twitter activities, tweets, and also citations tracked by dimensions. So dimension is information service, analytical service. All your local articles with digital object identifiers are covered, tracked by dimensions. It's better than Google Scholar in terms of searches. So there is slight difference between dimensions and Google Scholar. And here is example how social media channels can also help to evaluate articles, particularly if we have altmetrics score, altmetrics attention score. In this particular case, it's more than 14,000. It's algorithmically calculated. History of open access. It all started in 2002. It was aimed to help readers, academicians to write proper articles, and there were several important documents. We call these documents BBB, Budapest, Berlin, and Bethesda declarations. All these three declarations were about author rights and quality of archived articles. So open access is about archiving. If you publish open access journal in your country, you should think about archiving somewhere, Vernadsky Library, but not just simply catalogizing, but keeping your physical copies of your journals in your local national library. So these are important. And also, first point about author rights. You should use Creative Commons licenses, attribution license. We talked about that license. Bethesda Declaration allowed to formulate keyword related to open access publishing. Definition also based on these important documents, and open access can help increase quality of published works and also quality of education. It's mainly about free access, reuse of published items. Reuse means also machine readability of your articles. Examples of local journal. Well, today we have a representative of this journal. Unfortunately, I wanted to stress out that they have sign-in barrier. These sign-in barrier should not be in place for open access journals. So abolish that barrier. All open access journals should provide access to readers without any barrier. Even if you ask them to sign in and then freely read your articles, it's barrier not encouraged by society. So abolish that barrier. And also I see that most Eastern European or local journals still have that copyright issue. They still ask to sign copyright transfer statement or copyright notice statement. Simply, you should liberalize. No any license contract with authors. Liberalize. Allow your authors to publish the first version of their manuscript with your journal and then reuse it as they wish, but with link to primary publication. Another example, good journal, unfortunately not so good with English. I spotted this mistake because pediatrics cannot be written as pediatry. It's pediatrics. So probably local journals need English editors. It should be part of their editorial staff. Check whether your editorial staff or whether you have or not language editor post for English and local languages. Here you see good journal in terms of open access. One of numerous journals from Ternopil National Medical University. You see copyrights are transferred to authors, a group of authors. However, I discourage this type of presenting copyrights. It should be separate, not in author bylines. And there should be also Creative Commons icon next to this copyright issue, copyright symbol. And Startup Journal started in 2017 from Ivano-Frankivsk, good journal, because it's digitized, but unfortunately I couldn't find website of this journal. It's important to have properly or professionally designed website, and I'll tell you about local repository, which can allow increasing visibility of local journals. Open Access Scholarly Publishers Association is for open access journals. Its main association. Unfortunately, local associations or journals are not membering this association, but they should do, and all open access journals should read and enforce points of this association in their instructions for authors. Let's say they should have website, they should have proper unique name. Most local journals simply translate other journals and sell out their journals, let's say, with similar names. Be very careful. If you have similar names, let's say Nature, you should put in brackets that it's from Ukraine. Or Science, of course, it's illogical to have the same name for local journals, but if you have this type of journals, you should mention that it's Ukrainian journal. Implications of access, open access. First of all, quality increases, peer review also increases, research metrics nowadays are reliant or dependent on open access, and corrections and retractions as well. In the era of open access, we have numerous corrections and retractions, and we should retract articles based on Committee on Publication Ethics guidelines. When we can retract, editor-in-chief can retract in cooperation with publisher if there is clear evidence that findings are erroneous, honest or intentional errors. if there is substantial high level of textual or graphical plagiarism, copyright infringement, or absence of local ethical committee approval, and many other reasons for retractions. Unfortunately, any article is retracted in Eastern Europe, in your country, which is not normal. You should think about it. You should have editorial policies related to corrections and retractions, and show off your editorial stance. Plan S. In Western world, in Europe, it's mandatory from next year. It will become mandatory to publish everything in open access journals with proper archiving, let's say archiving by PubMed Central or other local or professional repositories, let's say for economists, REPEC repository, research papers repository. Quality of open access, how we evaluate based on how you adhere to these two important set of statements coming from Open Access Scholarly Publishers Associations and Committee on Publication Ethics. All open access journals can benefit from Sarajevo Declaration, and some local journals now adhere to these statements. The aim is to make editorial workflow transparent, support professional editorial teams, promote ethical standards, increase visibility of works by mandating, let's say, ORCID IDs. Hopefully all today's participants are familiar with ORCID IDs. If not, simply mention about that in our chat. Here is an example of one of, let's say, emerging scholarly journals, again from Zaslavsky Publishing House. You see, I consulted their managing editor a year ago, and now I see that they endorse Sarajevo Declaration and encourage their authors to present ORCID IDs along with their manuscripts. They also endorse Declaration on Research Assessment, DORA, notorious or famous DORA Declaration. You can do the same. And you can see here also directory of open access journals. They listed, they managed to list their journal. It's first step for upgrading standards in an open access journal. Open access journals are nowadays integrated not just with ORCID, but also with Publons. DOIs are important for open access journals. Without DOI, you cannot have success with Scopus indexing. And it's also important to have XML conversion for English-only journals for PubMed Central archiving. So now about something different. There are different models of open access. In your instructions for authors, as editors, you should disclose what type of open access is used or employed by your journal. Green, when you encourage archiving after publication, gold, when you charge your authors for publication, and hybrid, when you have subscription and gold open access articles in one journal. So these are different models. But there is also the best model for Eastern Europe, platinum or diamond open access journal, when there are no publication fees for authors and readers, and someone covers all these publications fees. Let's say medical sciences is covered by local scientific society, and all authors and readers do not pay any charges for accessing articles and publishing articles. They have platinum open access model. So the best Creative Commons license is attribution license, where you transfer all rights to your authors, but they should be very careful with this. They shouldn't publish before submission. They may republish something in another journal, but should inform about primary publication. Here is an example how we disclose. information about copyrights and Creative Commons licensing for reuse and redistribution. Nowadays, we have a number of preprint services allowing to prioritize your research work, and you can archive with these preprint services. Let's say Indians do it frequently. They first archive their research article with preprints or review article, and then submit that manuscript to good journals. It's mainly for prioritizing work, research work. Examples for physics, for biologists, these are preprint services. Source archive for specialists in social sciences. In chemistry, there is another, Chem archive. All specialists nowadays use these preprint services for posting but not publishing, simply posting their articles. Institutional repositories. All universities in Eastern Europe should have their institutional repository to allow their faculty members to reposit or archive articles published elsewhere in their own institutional repository. A good example is, of course, I always refer to this example in Kazakhstan, Nazarbayev University. All faculty members are from UK, US, and other countries, and they are among rapidly advancing universities. National repositories are important. You know probably about your own national repository, and I encourage, it's not promotion, I have no any relations with open science in Ukraine, but I encourage all local journals to use their platform, Open Journal System, modified, and their services for cross-ref links, for even for submitting their journal applications to Scopus and Web of Science. So these are national repositories. Yours also national repository for increasing visibility. I presented this Croatian example to show that all specialties benefit from national repositories. Unfortunately, you still rely on national repositories of your neighboring countries, but you should know that repositories in English are important for visibility. The best repository, English repository, is of course PubMed Central. And this is not just this repository, not just for medics and biologists, but also for other specialties. In PubMed Central, we have some journals from former communist Soviet Republic, Lithuania, and from Iran. Iran is also advanced in publishing their journals in English. This is why they are well represented in PubMed Central. Deutsch, how to apply? So there are around 300 journals from your country. It's lengthy, technically quite difficult process of application, but there are some simple steps. You should do it step by step. If you improve your instructions, if you understand what open access means, you can easily index your journal by directory of open access journals. There are some good examples listed by directory of open access, but I am not satisfied with names of your local journals because you simply repeat the same English journals or inappropriately, incorrectly formulate names. Be very careful. This is important for journal archiving. So Scopus separately indexes or distinguishes subscription and open access journals. Publons also part of open access, and in your country we have 39,000 reviewers registered with Publons. It's a platform for peer reviewers. Today's participants are strongly encouraged as editors and reviewers to register with Publons and transfer information about previous accomplishments to Publons. In Publons, we have a number of open access publishers like PLOS One, Public Library of Science One, BMJ Open, and they also encourage publicly displaying information about peer review accomplishments. So this part relates to editorial processes, where editors allow publicly posting review comments or not. If not, then simply official acknowledgements can be easily transferred by your reviewers to Pavlos. You as editors can encourage publishing interviews and other open access video articles. Here is an example how it's done with Biomed BMC publisher. It's easy if you know how to record information in MP4 format. There are some video journals publishing solely video articles, like Journal of Visualized Experiments for specialists in biomedicine, cell medicine, biology, etc. And of course, open science, open access is all about dissemination of published sources openly via open channels like Twitter. Twitter is open channel for disseminating information. In some countries, particularly in China, because of communist regulation, because of some local traditions, Twitter and other social media services are blocked, which is unfortunate, which is not good for their science and for visibility of their science. So they also do not like Google, and they also blocked Google. So visibility of Chinese articles and local journals in China is not high because of their restrictions. When we discuss social media channels, we should remember that Twitter is commonly used by scholars, and points from Twitter are important for alternative metrics. You as authors should be encouraged to promote your articles after publications. For that, you need a reliable Twitter account, and you simply should promote your article post-publication. Here is an example how an article is promoted. You see that dimension citations are high. The article is well tweeted, more than 400 times, and overall or cumulative alternative attention score is above 500, which is impressive number. So now about some unethical stance practice access. Jeffrey Bill first mentioned about these unethical practices almost 10 years ago. He blacklisted journals, publishers, open access publishers. You should know that even Index Copernicus was blacklisted as service with misleading metrics, because their metrics only increase. They should fluctuate, not just increase. So there are blacklisted journals with big names, with unrealistic names like international, world, global, etc. There are numerous offers from predatory publishers, offers from commercial editing agencies in your region as well. All journals of predatory publishers are useless, and these type of journals simply corrupt open access, and particularly in non-mainstream or non-Anglophone countries like yours. So be very careful with all these offers from editing agencies, and avoid invitations from these agencies to publish in Poland and Georgia. You probably know about journals that frequently are targeted in your country. So here is an example of unethical journal which was delisted by Scopus and Web of Science, but they still have information about impact factor on their journal. Another Indian journal, there are some, unfortunately, some Indian journals also blacklisted. Here is an example of Scopus and Web of Science index journal, which commercialized their services and was delisted because they rapidly increased number of articles without peer review, with soft peer review. So the journal was delisted, and there are hundreds of articles published from your country and other Eastern European countries. So some pictures from England and from two main cities which are unfortunately suffering because of pandemic. And here is a famous photo from a British library. So I hope that the pandemic, the current situation will improve in the coming months, and all related restrictions will be also lifted, and we will have more chances for traveling, for meeting our friends, arranging conferences face to face. Over to moderator.
Dear Armen, thank you very much for your presentation. According to our program, we have two uncovered issues. The first one is preparing journal applications for indexing by Scopus and Web of Science. And the second one is your masterclass on systematic searches through Scopus and PubMed. And the last one, can you at the end to say a few words about importance of launching Ukrainian Council of Science editor? Why this is important for development of Ukrainian scientific journals? 3 issues. Thank you.
Okay. I know that you are punctual and you always stick to our program.
It's important.
But yeah, important, but we cannot cover everything in one go, so in one webinar. We had covered some issues previously, and we are going to cover some of these issues related to searches next time, which will be next webinar in July. But before that, we'll have also June 22nd webinar on COVID-19. So we should encourage our participants, particularly journal editors, to upgrade their journal instructions, and I can help individually to work with instructions for authors and publication ethics statements. You as moderator can continue our cooperation. We do not have magic bullets for or cookbook applicable to all journals. We should do everything step by step. I know that today's participants expect a lot out of this webinar, but there are some limitations. Now about journal application to Scopus. I would encourage some journals to apply, but later, not now, because at the moment, almost 90% of local journals have deficiencies in instructions for authors, in quality of journal articles, and also problems with peer review. So now, what does it mean? Scopus. Scopus covers 100% of Medline index journals. They cover different disciplines, so this is why it's important for us. It's non-Anglophone database, largest, with around 30,000 journals or periodicals covered by this database. Compared to Web of Science, Scopus covers more non-Anglophone sources from your region as well, so chances of indexing non-Anglophone journals published in Slavic languages are high for Scopus. Selection criteria. Pay attention to old, almost active still now. English language abstracts, quality abstracts, regular or punctual publication, editorial policy for quality control, publication ethics statements, and references in Roman script, or if you have Slavic references, transcripted. But my advice to editors is to have to validate references and try to replace poorly visible Slavic references with better visible sources from Scopus, Web of Science, and PubMed. Current selecting or indexing criteria: journal policy, content quality, journal standing in terms of editor-in-chief, influential editors, influential authors, reviewers, and also citations, citedness of editorial board members. Regularity: if you have irregular publication, chances of indexing are minimal, none. Online availability: all journals should have properly designed websites. Steps of Scopus applications: 7 steps. I'm not going to discuss everything, but at least minimal criteria can be touched upon. Publication ethics and publication malpractice statement is important, and it should be separate from instructions for authors. Peer review should be present. In terms of peer review, I encourage all journal editors with membership in Crossref to have Pablon's page. Example of good online or open access journal: you see, it's progressing well. Impact factor is pending. They are integrated with social media. They have information about processing their articles. It's Dove Press Publisher. Example for all specialists. In Pablon's, we have good record from your country, good record of specialists with hundreds of reviewed manuscripts. The best, of course, in my opinion, is these are 3 highly productive reviewers. I should mention Bohdana Doskaluk from Ivano-Frankivsk. Ivano-Frankivsk National Medical University should be proud of this lady and should credit this lady because of her highly professional reviewer accomplishments, which are nowadays considered as publication units. So she is one of the best local reviewers. We discussed digital IDs. For journal indexing, all these IDs are important. For open access journal, electronic ISSN is important for journal. So example of disclosing Twitter handle. So next time with you, hopefully everyone will have Twitter account and we will have chance to discuss professional issues on Twitter as well. References: these should be relevant, and as an editor, I always recheck references. Updated, relevant, diversified, widely visible. No need to overly cite website and unpublished references. Examples of recommended and not recommended references: we discussed this. Hopefully all journal editors will provide link to this article in their instructions for authors. In terms of publication ethics and malpractice statement, I again stress out importance of this page. Retraction policy should be in place, and recheck again whether you have retraction policy. Usually research integrity editors deal with retractions and other unethical practices of authors, reviewers, and editors. And here is the example from Croatia, good index journal. They have 2 research integrity editors dealing with different types of unethical practices. I encourage all local journals also to have research integrity editors as staff members, and they should rely on 2 important documents. Provide links in their publication ethics statements. When you submit your application, you should either submit 9 separate articles or 3 latest issues of your journal. It's up to you. Now about quartiles. You know Saimago journal and country ranks, and you know that there are some subject categories. before submitting your journal application, you should carefully evaluate whether your journal meets standards of Scopus. If it's new journal, you should at least compete with quartile 3 journals. Here is quartile 1. Let's say in the field of rheumatology, there are 60 journals, and quartile 1, first quartile, is formed of 15 journals, high quality top journals. New rheumatology journal should at least compete with journals in terms of citations and quality issues with quartile 3 journals. Remember about that. If your journal cannot compete with, in terms of citations, alternative metrics, and the other indicators with quartile 3 and 4, no need to submit your journal application. It will be rejected outright. Here I present some of quartile 3 and quartile 4. Most local journals, unfortunately, are in these 3 and 4, and this is why local journal local authors who publish in local journals are they do not benefit from local publications. So what journal editors can do, local journal editors, they simply can increase quality of articles, increase citations ethically, and help their local authors to increase their chances of international promotion and recognition. Now, about additional information. Technically, it's important to have full information about publisher. Usually, publishing editor submits application to Scopus and Web of Science. For journal editors, it's important, quite important, to have full archive and information when the periodical started to publish. Unfortunately, most local journals have domestic editorial boards. We should aim to increase internationalization. Who is main or handling editor? Chief editor and associate editors. Photographs of these editors should be available on web pages and their editorial credentials to impress Scopus experts. Editorial boards should have regular editorial board meetings to discuss technical issues, to incentivize their reviewers, editors, and authors, like good journals do. And internationalization also relates to peer review. Should have, of course, it's a main problem with Eastern European countries, even with Polish scientists. Polish journals, they also rely on their local resources, local reviewers, which is grossly incorrect. Scope and coverage. Always check good journals, top journals. Factors of high influence, of course, Medline, English language. If you increase percentage of articles published in English, chances of indexing are high. That principle is well accepted by only few Eastern European or post-Soviet journals because of inertia of Soviet state language. There was only one language, official language, and that language is still prevalent in most post-Soviet countries. So change your journals, particularly in biomedicine and medicine. Web of Science application. Technically, it's almost the same. The only difference is that Web of Science prioritizes journals publishing articles of interest to American or US authors, readers. So if you wish to have your journal covered by emerging sources citation index, you should publish articles relevant to American healthcare, of interest to American doctors. And of course, first step is emerging sources citation index. Medline indexing is difficult for most local journals, but still They should know how Medline covers journals. They index evidence-based journals. So for them, evidence-based is priority. If you publish large cohort studies, trials, recommendations of associations, you increase chances of indexing by Medline. Priorities are, of course, evidence-based. And it helps to increase retrievability of your articles because it relates Medline indexed articles linked to mesh subjects. Now, for chemistry specialists, biomedical specialists, pharmacology, pharmacy, if they fail to index by Scopus, they still can index the journal by Embase, Experta Medica, or database for biomedical specialists. Not just biomedical, by chemical specialists as well. So what's the difference between Embase and Medline? Embase is part of Elsevier, product of Elsevier, and Elsevier is European service, European publisher. This is why they publish more, they cover more journals from Europe, from non-Anglophone countries compared to Medline. Principles of indexing by Medline are much easier to index your journal. Here you can see 3 basic principles: editorial boards and peer review in place. Priorities also relate to English articles, and if you have good publisher or with good standing, editorial standing, then chances of indexing by Medline, by Embase are high. I'll briefly go through these indexing services, particularly in the pandemic. In times of pandemic, these global health service is important. If you publish articles related to microbiology, virology, you can get your journal indexed by Global Health or CAP-E service. If you have RSS service or automatic service of sharing a table of contents, you can get journal talks coverage. Ulrich directory is for those with reliable ISSN index. Not so difficult, they simply check technical criteria. Cross-reference, I think that cross-ref membership via Open Science in Ukraine easy can be done, or local journals can do it individually. EBSCO aggregator for increasing information about your local journals. PsycInfo for neurology, psychology, psychiatry journals, quite tough indexing criteria. For chemistry specialists, chemical abstract service, the main criterion is relevance. If you publish articles related to chemistry, you can get indexed by chemical abstract service. And Deutsch, we discussed Deutsch slightly. We also discussed other advantages of open access and social media. So these are also important for indexing. Why? Because Scopus covers alternative metrics as well. Here you see PlumX imprint, it's like altmetrics, donut, ring, so they track and display information next to article metadata and other details. So pay attention to not just citations, but also to alternative metrics. And again, as we are approaching end of this seminar, I encourage all editors to read guidelines, documents from International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, VAMI, Council of Science Editors, and Committee on Publication Ethics. And the rest is up to you. So over to our moderator.
Yes, and our last point, masterclass on systematic searches through Scopus. Yes, you promised.
Let's do this way. We will practice with
Of
this
course, of course.
databases. Yeah, but we now need some short break, some interaction with our audience.
Okay.
And can you just stop sharing my screen for a while because I cannot see you?
Yes, one moment.
Okay, I'll do that
Okay.
myself. Simply, now we still have members, all participants active, present. Any questions from audience? From Vinnytsia, we have 3 or more participants from Vinnytsia National Medical University. These are good authors, good reviewers. Katerina Zaichko, Irina Shapoval, and probably others. I know them personally. I know Dmitro from Bogomolets National Medical University, Dmitro Polkov.
Дмитро Федьков.
Fedькov,
Yes.
yeah, who is also a good, excellent reviewer, active, yeah, and who actively follows our webinars. All these participants are potentially the best editors of local Ukrainian journals. Let's say I would push Bohdana Daskyuluk to become editor in her local medical journal, or at least science editor. Why we need science editors activity? Because they understand publication ethics. They know how to improve authors' skills, and they probably also know how to write articles in English. So these type of authors are precious assets for your local professional community. And I am grateful to these individual participants for their activity, for coming, for listening over the past 3 hours. Any questions, comments? Olena.
Now we don't have any questions and any comments. Probably our participants are waiting for your master class.
Elena, if I can make a few comments.
Yes, one moment. Так, just a moment. Василь Лунчина. Yes. You can start your video. Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So, Armen and Durga, I mean, what a wonderful 3 hours of presentation. It's just overwhelming. Such important information for us, and a guideline of how to proceed. I think that being on the editorial board of Medicini Nauki and doing a lot of the peer reviews, the information you're giving us is going to leaders, to editors, but we need to disseminate that information to the practitioners, especially our students, our young researchers, our young students, our young doctors that write these articles, because they have to be guided in the proper way of writing. And I find this is lacking. The articles that I review are fraught with many problems. I mean, there's a lot of plagiarism. I mean, I think it is acceptable, or it seems like it seems to be acceptable to take an article and just take from that article bits and pieces, and then take a few articles and put together your own articles out of several different articles. I find this so often. I am just amazed. Here in the States, in editing a book, I mean, I found that, but I find that usually with very young authors who don't know how to write yet. But the more seasoned ones do not do that. But I find it more and more here, and I think we need to have master classes and maybe just regular classes. I mean, it doesn't take very much for each editor in every city to have a monthly session with the students on how to write. how to research. And when you then teach your young people how to do that, then the articles we receive in the journals will be a much higher quality. Unfortunately, I have to state that at this point, I am disappointed with the quality that I've been reviewing. And Armando, what you said about English, I mean, yes, in the English language, English scientific language, it is very important to write in short sentences, concise, simple. In the Ukrainian language, it is not unusual to see a page-long paragraph, and your head is swimming because you can't follow what is what, and you have to read it several times to figure out the information and how it's organized. So we have to teach our people to write simply and write short sentences, and then, and as you said, the paragraph has to have a beginning and an end. You have to have the aim and then the conclusion, even within the paragraph. When you write the entire article, you have to follow like our instructions on how to divide it into introduction, materials and methods, results, and then discussion. It's all over the board. I mean, we're throwing a lot of information together into a big pot of stool, and we want something good to come out of it. So I think, I think it's our very important onus and responsibility today and every day is to start teaching our young people how to write. And I think if we do that, then the next generation will produce very good articles, manuscripts, and we can be then proud of our journals, because we will have very good articles that we could publish in the journals, and then we can enter Scopus. I mean, until we have good articles, it's great to be talking about entering Scopus, but we have to have the material. And I don't see that right now.
Yeah, excellent point, Vasil. I fully agree with you that we should start working with students, and I know that you visited Lviv National Medical University on several occasions, and you had master classes in English. So they also need exposure to professors like you to listen and to read. If they continue reading only local non-Anglophone journals, non-English journals, they cannot improve their skills. They should start reading Lancet reviews, let's say, New England Journal of Medicine, Nature, Science, or all other specialists. The Economist is good journal with good, perfect English for non-medics. This type of journal should be regularly approached by non-Anglophone specialists. And science students should also have their own classes entirely devoted to writing in English, in proper English, either American or British, and should avoid plagiarism. You're right. It starts from medical education. I know that they produce annual reports and all students, and often some unethical students plagiarize, copy from internet, and sell off that information as original. So let's say in universities like Oxford University, copying even annual reports or annual activities of students also prohibited, and they can lose scholarship and expelled from university for copying. Copying takes place also in presentations, PPT presentations. So I think that throughout student medical conferences, you and other tutors can pay attention to local, I mean Ukrainian students' activities and guide them how to avoid copying slides, this type of activities, and produce something unique, not redundant, because we know even Indian students, Indian, Pakistani, they have the same problems. Medical students often plagiarize. Why? Because they think that someone who published already something, published properly in good English, and they simply take and copy. In China, almost the same problem with plagiarism. when we deal with Chinese submissions, we should be very careful because they plagiarize or they publish something in their own local journals in Mandarin and then translate in English and submit. So plagiarism is flag for global publishing enterprise, not just for Ukraine. But in Ukraine, there is just specific. We need professors like you who should frequently visit or arrange webinars and teach some courses in English, and encourage to read good journals in English. We can also increase quality of local journals, and our aim is to increase number of articles published in English. This way we can increase attractiveness of these journals for Scopus and Web of Science. I am well aware of some local journals indexed by Emerging Sources Citation Index because of good visibility and because of good abstracts in English and references in Roman script or in English references. Basic steps achieved by some like Zaporozhye Medical Journal or problems of endocrine science. Today we had participants from tuberculosis, pulmonary diseases, and HIV local journal. Chances of indexing that particular journal are high because interest to that journal of international community will be high. With medical sciences, we also have some priorities, and it's good that this journal is now going to become flagship journal for the whole Eastern European region and guide all other journal editors by launching Council of Science Editor in region and supporting best guidelines of global editorial associations and also having their own editorial guidance. Hopefully we'll have around 100 members in that council and expand membership gradually, because not everyone understands the importance of this type of societies, associations. My colleagues in other countries, let's say neighboring countries, launched their association and it's now highly active. They promote activities, arrange webinars almost weekly, and promote their journals in Scopus, Web of Science, and other databases. So we should do step by step, starting from medical students, should increase number of critical number of journal editors. Today we have many ongoing researchers from different parts of region, and of course these are our future. We should rely on these guys who are good at English. They can write articles in English. They can start by publishing articles in good English journals, and they also can support local journals by publishing their own articles with local journals as well. I am grateful to you, Vasil, for commenting on that important point, and you raised some important problems, not easily solved problems. But I hope that Professor Valentina Chopak, representing local immunologists, and she is also a prolific author, Professor Oksana Zayachkivska, she's head of one of the leading and oldest faculty departments of physiology, these type of experts, and also Rostislav Stoico, who is cell medicine specialist, cell biology specialist with a big name in this field. They can help us with promoting activities of council, arranging webinars, lecturing in English, and step by step increasing quality of not just one journal, but hundreds of journals. Thank you for your comment.
And I just want to also have a positive comment, and that is in working with Professor Zayichkiushka at the Lviv Danilo Halitsky University, she has created a club of students, the Physiology Club, whose purpose is to monthly or so have lectures presented by the students themselves and other professors in English. So they are already well on their way to promoting the English language in medicine. And the young people, they are savvy. They're on the internet. They do read the medical literature. And I think it is our duty to now instruct them in proper writing. And also our younger physicians. I mean, it's not just the students, but it's also the younger physicians, the researchers. They need, I think, more guidance in how to write good scientific papers.
Yeah, it's good example. You serve as role models. You as a visiting professor, and Oksana Zayichkievska, who started working with medical students. And I know that English of speaking English of majority of students in Lviv is high, but we have some differences east and west in east and western part of Ukraine. We have I would say that the situation with English is better in countries with more international cooperation. Cooperation with not just Anglophone, but Western countries. So we should encourage more this type of cooperation. Okay, so Olena? Someone is sharing screen?
Not mine.
I see. Okay, so what I wanted to show you is, Olena, can you activate my screen? Allow me to share my screen?
One moment.
Okay.
Yes, now you can share your screen with us. Yes.
Okay. So as we going through pandemic, first of all, for biomedical specialists, biology, cell, mesenchymal, stem cell specialists, this resource should be valuable. So lead COVID based on PubMed resources. You see, it's new, relatively new, started, launched in March 2020 to help specialists to search specifically articles related to COVID-19. Let's say local. We see that there are too many articles related to COVID-19 and Ukraine. So analysis is presented on one side. Principle is based on Scopus searches. When we analyze retrieved articles, we also deal with keywords. Here is just specialized database. It's new and very quite valuable resource for biomedical specialists. Top cited articles, top mentioned articles relate to hydroxychloroquine, which is promoted by President Trump, but unfortunately this drug causes a lot of problems, side effects, heart problems. So this is why this article commented frequently in terms of treatment of COVID-19. Journals covering COVID-19 issues: BMJ, British Medical Journal, Journal of Medical Virology, Lancet, New England Journal of Medicine. These are top journals, and they are concerned with COVID-19. Now all journals prioritize COVID-19 articles. So, and we have high rejection rate of these type of articles, I as editor as well. So we need more information about, I'll show you countries covered by this information. Countries mentioned. Unfortunately, there are some countries, particularly in Central Asia, Mongolia, not gray colored countries without any articles where their country is mentioned. Ukraine is mentioned, but you see dark blue color, China, almost thousands of articles mentioning China when they discuss COVID-19 issues. So this type of resource is important and principle is simple. So we can visualize information through analysis, and it automatically comes out. This map of articles, mapping of articles with different keywords. Geographic keywords are tagged in each articles, in each covered article. So this is one of specialist database. It's not database, it's based on PubMed searches, but still very helpful research search option for specialists. And we see that there are currently around 20,000 articles in PubMed related to COVID-19. So use this resource. I wanted also to show, I actually showed some examples of Scopus searches. However, Scopus is unavailable at the moment to show you more. I don't know why, they have technical problems. Scopus works to restore full access. Principles of searches are the same. 2 keywords and the same principles apply to dimensions. Dimensions is similar to Google Scholar. Local journals with visibility, we have some problems with access. Scopus is unavailable at the moment. I wanted to practice with you, but here are dimensions options. Why we need dimensions? It's more advanced compared to Google Scholar. Dimensions allow to track alternative metrics. Google Scholar do not display that information. So there is slight differences. So this is why dimensions is more advanced. So it covers citations and alternative metrics. I have some connection, so sorry about that.
Dear Armen, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Scopus is unavailable, so probably next time it will be available and we can practice. Okay, let's go again to our audience, encourage our audience to comment, share their thoughts. We have today Roman Yatsishin from Ivano-Frankivsk, the Dean of Medical Faculty. I am grateful to him for arranging delegates from Ivano-Frankivsk, and I am sure that their journals will rapidly increase quality of their articles, and they will publish not just in local but also international journals, and I am available to help them. Roman, you can share your thoughts with audience today. You have now that opportunity, and thank you for encouraging Petro Geric, also another professor from Ivano-Frankivsk, to attend this webinar. Bogdana Doskaluk also. So these are participants who are quite active. They follow all our webinars. Olena, you can unmute.
I am going to unmute, but
It's muted.
Probably Bogdana Doskaluk would like to say a few words.
Okay.
Bogdana, would you like to say? I tried to unmute and asked you to start video.
Hello, maybe videos later or some next time. Yeah, I'm really very thankful for all the good words that I have listened today into my address, and I will try to keep my best. And this webinar was really very necessary, especially about statistic part, because I have told already numerous times that there is a lot of problems in understanding of statistic issues, and I hope that there will be a lot of other webinars where we can go even more deeply in this question. So I don't know what to add more. Really very thankful. Okay. A beautiful webinar, a beautiful ending for this holiday in Ukraine. Maybe that's why we are not in a so big company, because it's the holiday, but still the most keen on editing and science are all here.
Most active participants are there, yeah, you're right. So for statistics, we first should have access to SPSS or any other statistical package. Let's say Olena is now expert in statistics because she knows a lot. And I also, as editor, use SPSS statistical package. So we need to learn basic things. Today, Durga presented some tips on statistical analysis and how to spot statistical mistakes. And you, sometimes also Alena, also act as statistical reviewers, but we are not experts in statistics. We simply can spot basic mistakes in statistical reporting, and there are some good experts. Of course, we'll discuss statistical issues along with other issues. For us at the moment, the most important points relate to quality standards, ethical publishing, and step by step we'll upgrade our, increase coverage of our webinar topics and help all contributors, authors, reviewers, and journal editors. Thank you for your attention, and thank you also for working on your own papers. I know that your papers are well edited, well processed, and I am sure you will become journal editors soon. For me, of course, role model is Olena, because she started a few years ago, and she upgraded her skills, attended a number of meetings, seminars, webinars, and by this way, she increased her chances of joining several leading journals. So she's journal editor in some leading biomedical or index journals. So she can help, and we need critical mass, critical number of editors with editorial credentials to increase visibility of your local journals.
Dr. Armen, Rostislav Stoika would like to say a few words, but I asked to start video. One moment. And
you can unmute him first.
Yes, I try, but I cannot.
Yes, probably system doesn't allow. Zoom system, yeah.
I can unmute all participants.
Oh,
О. Так. Dr. Rostislav, can you hear me? Would you like to say a few words? Professor Stoyka? He is still unmuted.
excellent. Problems, local, regional problems with journals. You can discuss this information, this part in Ukrainian. What type of problems you face with local journals. Today, I expected some participants from Ukrainian Rheumatology Journal, Biomedical Journal, funded by Ukrainian Rheumatology Associations. Unfortunately, only one participant represents that journal, Roman Yatsishin. It's good journal, but they still publish a lot of articles in local or Russian language, so it's not good. They should publish more in English to increase indexability of their journal. Though I should confess that they publish influential articles for local audience. Marta Jus is one of leading authors in Ukraine in rheumatology, and she publishes English articles and articles for local journals. And I know that quality of research is high. So we need this type of participants, this type of contributors who promote local science and represent at a higher level.
Marta, would you like to say something? I know that you are on mute.
Yes, hello to everybody, and thank you for wonderful webinar. Sorry, I was a little bit late, so I didn't hear the beginning of the webinar, but still I feel that it was very encouraging and very interesting. So I hope that I will receive the recorded lectures which I missed. And I thank you very much to Armen that you encouraged me for reviewing some manuscripts. And I feel that when I am reviewing manuscripts, I educated at the same time.
Your skills, yeah, as author as well. You
So-
learn from others. You learn from others' mistakes.
So thank you very much for this opportunity, and I hope that in future our journals will be much better, because I feel that we should start writing in English, not only
great.
for our local journals, but also we should write more articles for
Index journals, yeah. You're absolutely right, Marta Jus, professor from Bohomolets National Medical University. So thank you, Marta, for attending this webinar, and I hope that you will publish a few English articles in good journals with us, with other journals, it depends. So we need good articles for local and international journals. And we need also support in terms of peer review, and all our reviewers are encouraged to open Pablon's page and send information, acknowledgements to Pablon's. Professor Stoyka is now available.
Yes, he was, but now he is still. Just a moment.
Here.
Okay. Can you start your
Hello.
video?
Hello, Rostislav. Hello.
I can see Armen, but I can't see my.
Oh, great.
Okay. So thank you very much. I was. Oh, sorry.
What's the problem with microphone? There is something wrong with probably
We cannot hear you. We cannot hear you, Rostislav.
because of microphone problem. Mic something wrong.
Olena, can I say a few words to
Yes.
our organizers?
Yeah.
Uh,
Thank you.
Of
Yes.
course.
I would like also to discuss today our webinar. First of all, thank you very much, all organizers, Olena, to contact all us, and my big pleasure to share lectures from our key speakers. So it's very, very interesting, and I did a lot before about getting new words, new information. І дійсно дуже приємно, що сьогодні в нас представлена не лише Західна Україна, а й центральна. Кількість учасників стає більшою, і я думаю, що дійсно ми підходимо до того поняття, що нам потрібно об'єднуватися і об'єднуватися в асоціацію редакторів України. Ми представляємо біомедичні науки, але, звичайно, такі самі проблеми існують і в інших науках, і тому приємно, що нас стає більше. Як всі присутні знають, ми хочемо, щоб наша асоціація долучилася до головних світових інституцій, про які ми сьогодні почули. Це і редакція медичних редакторів, асоціація, і напевно, дійсно всі ці журнали нам потрібно читати регулярно, підписати, зробити підписку. І це допоможе все ж таки покращити нас в медійному плані, сильнішому, щоб ту хвилю негативу про Україну, про українські журнали зменшити і вразити світ хорошими публікаціями. So, Armen, I am now switched to English that you understand, and we're really very happy that we collect many participants from different universities, from different area of science. It's very important to create positive image in media about Ukrainian journals, because, you know, and a lot of negative waves going against Ukraine and some Ukrainian journals which are very primitive or bad organized, because really it's knowledge, it's new environment of 21st century, and we need to create new generation. And I'm very happy that in our journals, big team of young physicians who helped me in editorial process, in peer review, in promotion in social media, and that I recommended to all present editors to invite young people. I really don't understand Ivano-Frankivsk Medical University. They have so brilliant lady. For sure, if she didn't find any place, we invite to our journals, because
Bogdana deserves that.
She deserves that. So many outside editorial teams keep journals very close and not open for connection with young new generation of physicians, PhD students, for any who are interested in editorial, scientific writing. This should be open, very welcome. Rostislav, are you here with us?
He has problem with his microphone. It seems that he has problems.
There's technical issues.
Yes.
Okay, in that case, I just wanted also to thank two publishers who joined us. First was Vitapol, yeah, they joined us today. Vitapol, Olena, correct me?
Yes.
Okay, one was Vitapol, the second one was Zaslavsky Publishing House with Professor Pankiv.
Володимир Іванович Паньків. Yes.
Pankiv, yeah, we know him. We met him at Vitamin D conference in Warsaw 3 years ago. Yeah, and his journal is also one of the leading local journals. It's called International Endocrinology Journal. Yeah, and they also are quite ambitious. They are going to index the journal with Scopus. They applied to Scopus. There are some local journals, I should disclose that information, that already applied to Scopus, and now in the process of improving quality and resubmission. So even if you fail first, your application is not successful first time, within 2 to 5 years, you can succeed. So I know also we have today participants from Ivano-Frankivsk. They have some good journals, startup journals, but Gorbachevsky Ternopil National Medical University has, they publish more than 10 biomedical journals. It's so their publishing house also needs active enforcement of global editorial guidelines. I checked some of their journals. They are not up to high editorial standards. So
One of them is present now. I mean, актуальні питання педіатрії, акушерства і гінекології. Професор Алла Бойчук, yes, is chief and editor of this journal.
We can ask her to comment, to share her thoughts.
We can ask,
Ukraine,
of course.
in Ukraine, if she is present. Some left our meeting because it's too late.
Yes.
Yeah, anyway, so there are hundreds of journals ready for upgrading their standards, and we should do it step by step. We cannot solve all problems by just one webinar. When we were planning this webinar, I was in close contact with Olena. I realized that all those participants wanted, particularly from non-medical fields, they wanted to solve all their problems by attending just one webinar. As expert reviewer of Scopus, I reassure you that it's long process. I help to index journals by Scopus and Web of Science, and by working with hundreds of journals, and it took few years to one decade. So initially I was working with Iranian journals, and number of journals joined. Then
Professor Stoika is with us. Probably he can say a few words.
Can you hear me now or no?
Oh, yes.
Very
but
good.
with echo. Still, your microphone is not properly placed.
But much better, yes.
Okay. Probably you should unmute all other participants to allow him.
Ой. He has some technical problems. I don't know what.
Technical problems still, yes.
Oh, yes. We can hear you, Professor Stoika. We can hear you. Yes.
Okay
now.
Okay, good. So regarding the references, because I have just specific comments, not general. I suggest that it was noted that it's very important to start from the original paper describing the method. So usually it could be old paper, but it's very important. Second, all journals, they request 3 years papers. So there could be some conflict between these, but still it's important. Then very often many groups are working in the same field. So you, not you, but not, we should cite all groups, I think 1, 2, 3, and leaving other groups without attention. Then regarding local citation, you know, it's a problem when it's not a paper in English. So, and regarding the lecture, doctor from India, I forgot. I found for myself that in our board of the journal, scientific board, we should have a specialist on statistics. Up to now, we do not have such specialists. So there should be a special man on statistics, because the scientific editor could not control everything. Even the authors can miss something very important. But if we have a special member of the editorial board responsible for statistics, it's very important. It will be very important. Regarding grammar mistakes, we are on the way to improve ourselves. Recently, I found on the internet regarding the importance of this, how to name it, it's a board of chief editors of different journals. So we really need to create such a board of chief editors, and hopefully we will do it. And finally, maybe it's a contradiction. You will not like me, but I am really against 10 magazines at each university. You know, that's impossible at the moment in Ukraine. That will not work. Better create inter-university journals with the best people in the board from all universities, instead of creating and trying and dragging the beginners, the journals which are the beginners. Will not do that. Maybe you will not like, your actors will not like me if I say, okay, your journal is at the moment is not very important. We cannot achieve in 5 years achieve the level of the Scopus level journal. That's my final opinion. Maybe it's the most confident, but that's what do I think.
Rostislav,
Thank you
for your comment. You are absolutely right. So I am also against so-called domestic journals or single affiliation journals. This is why we have medical sciences journal for the whole region, even not just for country, but for whole region. And we call it internationalization. So even university journal can change its editorial strategy and become international. So we should encourage all universities to do the same. You probably know about problems with Vestnik of one university or a bulletin of university. all these vestniks and bulletins are not welcomed by Scopus experts because they only reflect research in one university and called domestic or local. So internationalization is way out of that situation. And you are also mentioned about editor-in-chief. Again, I'm not with you, because we should encourage membership of science editors in Council of Science Editors, not just chief editors, because we know that chief editors in most universities are just administrators, deans, with busy specialists with no time to work on journals, and mostly these journals are improved by science editors, young ladies, young researchers. So having close club, small club of editors-in-chief is not so good. For expanding our network, we need more like Vitalina Tishenko, or she's from non-medic, yeah?
Кривий Ріг National University, yes?
Medical or non-medical? Non-medical, okay. So they also have the same problems. The same chief editors are busy administrators, and they delegate their functions to specialists like Vitalina and others. So we encourage science editors. You are right that we should have statistical editor. It's again for all journals. I mentioned about research integrity editors. So Olena acts as a research integrity editor in one journal. I act as a research integrity officer in another journal. So you can also have in every local journal, like in medical sciences, research integrity editors, statistical editor, social media editor. These are now trendy posts for local journals. So we should improve this way. So I fully agree with you that we should somehow improve, share responsibilities in a journal. So, and by sharing responsibilities, we can increase quality of work as well, where responsibility and quality are closely interconnected. Stoika, Professor Stoika?
Okay. Maybe the first step would be that we combine 2 or 3 journals which are in the related field science, and try to do something, improve. For example, we have medical chemistry in Ternopil Medical University. We have clinical and experimental biochemistry and physiology at Lviv Medical University. We have similar journal in Kiev University, and maybe in Kharkiv, I don't know at the moment. So if we create one good medical biochemistry journal, maybe it will be more reasonable.
With funding, proper funding, yeah. To merge this journal, to have new journal, and continue, yeah. The same way Croatians did 20 years ago. They established, history of Croatian Medical Journal. It was University of Zagreb Medical School Journal, but they renamed, made it national, and 5 universities joined, sponsored that journal, and Croatian Medical Journal is now small Lancet. So you can do the same, and you are right, your proposal is perfect, but
quartal 2, this journal, Croatian Medical, portal too.
Hi,
So,
yeah.
Yeah. I have maybe 8 papers in that journal.
And yes, and all others are encouraged also to publish with them the best good science based on proper statistics, new methodology. Yeah, I know that you are proponent of new advanced methodology, and probably referring to your comment, we should organize also journal clubs as webinars. Yeah.
I think we will validate 50%. Just try to do one and demonstrate it like Croatian Medical is doing well. Then all others will say, okay, they are doing well. We will try the same.
Okay. Got it. Thank you very much, Professor Stoica.
Okay.
So, Olena, we have few minutes left.
Probably Vitalina Tishchenko would like to say something.
In Ukrainian.
You don't have a microphone? She doesn't have a microphone, it seems. Mm-hmm. Oh, okay.
Okay, just smile. Smile. Are you satisfied, Vitalina? Yeah, okay, good. Useful? Are you good at English? Okay, so everything was clear. Can you enforce these points in instructions for authors of your journal? Do you have your own local journal?
Yes.
One?
Vitalina, you can say.
У меня проблемка.
Now it's okay. Just talk.
Зараз чути мене?
Так, чути, добре
Yes,
чути,
yes,
так,
of course.
так.
Добре, тому що я трошки проблем зі зв'язком, тому я переключилась на мобільний телефон, і зараз у мене ось така можливість.
Чудово вас чути.
Дякую. Я зараз представляю технічний університет Кривого Рогу, Криворізький національний університет, і ми також на шляху до Scopus, да, у нас є такий намір, є така мета. Отже, дуже цікавий вебінар, дуже інформативний, дещо інноваційне і є над чим працювати. Також хочу сказати, що всі ці bullet points, they're really important for us, yeah, and we will accept them and take attention to them, yeah, and they're relevant to our scope, yeah. So actually,
okay, I got your point. You mentioned about that before, but do you have local journals indexed by Scopus in Kryvyi Rog?
Local?
Do you have indexed journals, Scopus indexed journals, or no?
No.
Not yet. Okay, but
yeah.
Planning to submit application to Scopus. Okay, related to technical fields.
Yeah.
Technical.
So we have two journals here, and they belong to technical scopes here, and we have this intention. It's our main purpose here to get this reach, yeah, to gain this aim here, and so.
Okay, so principles of instructions for authors and publication ethics statements are the same. Today I presented these statements, so you should work on these statements if you are scientific editor of your journal. And you are also encouraged to join us in the future as editor, because we are launching, my colleagues are launching Council of Science Editors, local. So to solve problems, to discuss your problems and help increase indexability of your journals. And I am really thankful to you, Vitalina, because for the first time we have a representative from Kryvyi Rog.
Believe me, it's my pleasure here to join your meeting. So thank you so much. And
first time, but hopefully we'll meet again, and we'll meet face to face too, hopefully by the end of this year or next year, who knows. So try to stay home, save your health, and try to remain active. I know that situation with COVID-19 is threatening, and there is no end. We cannot see end of this pandemic. We should somehow adapt to new reality. And all journals should cover issues related to COVID-19. So as editor, we immediately, when pandemic was declared, we decided to publish more about COVID-19. Medical Sciences Journal, Medicine Science, they also they published special issue. So you can do the same. How you do research during pandemic. So adapt and publish more. Thank you, Vitalina. Hope to stay in touch with you.
Of course, yeah. Thank you so much.
Олена?
Отже, здається, що ми розглянули всі питання, які були заплановані в нашій програмі. Дякую нашим спікерам, так, Армену Гаспаряну, який добре розуміє українську мову і вчить українську мову, так? От, і сподіваємося, що це наш не останній вебінар, так? І також сподіваюся, що наступна зустріч буде не у вигляді вебінару, а у вигляді face-to-face meeting, так? Що COVID-19 пандемія закінчиться і ми зможемо повернутися до нормального спілкування, так? Відео ми записали, воно буде надіслано всім учасникам, так, вебінару, і також сертифікати протягом наступних днів.
And when our next webinar on June 22nd on COVID-19 for biomedical specialists.
Yes, you can join us.
If you wish, yeah.
But
we also have July webinar, again, for journal editors and reviewers. So we will announce these webinars separately. So stay in good health and in a good mood. Thank you to everyone for joining us today.
Thank you, Armen. Thank you, Olena.
Take good care.
Thank you, Vasil.
See you next time. See you all next time in good health. Bye-bye.
Okay. Good day. Stay safe.
You too.
Okay.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Goodbye. Галина Михайлівна. Галина Михайлівна.
Very nice, very beautiful. Thank you very much for all participants and dear speaker. We pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.